Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you listened to my story. Please give me a follow and like the video if you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment and provide feedback so I can improve the sound quality. Yes, we invite you to listen to part 8 of the series. Chapter 120, Chapter 120, Chapter 119, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, 19_1. Chapter 120, Chapter 119, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, 19_1. Within the sealed area, a killing intent emerged. You really dare to admit it? As soon as Fu Qian spoke, even Yuan Shan shuddered in disbelief, staring at him. What's there not to dare? The wrath of the demigod was no small matter, and although Yuan Shan had yet to make a move, the air seemed to fill with invisible whirlpools that were oppressive to the point of suffocation. Moreover, within the sealed area were 3 guards of around the 4th phase, who could arrive at any moment. However, Fu Qian remained unfazed. It saves time on probing, isn't that a good thing? You brought me down here to confirm this point, didn't you? Since you've said so much. Yuan Shan's expression was icy, her gaze sharp. I hope you use the precious time you've saved to explain yourself well, otherwise, you're going to have a hard time leaving here today. I didn't need you to tell me, I'd been aware of this the moment I arrived. Fu Qian thought to himself. When Poker Face said Yuan Shan wanted to meet him, he had already envisioned this scene. Nevertheless, Fu Qian had still come. The reason was simple, he hadn't found the thorn blood on Henrik's body. If he had confirmed the thorn blood on Henrik's body earlier, he would not have bothered with anyone and would have simply harvested it to complete the mission. However, not finding the thorn blood and confirming the presence of a person behind the scenes, it was necessary for him to make this trip, otherwise, he would simply become a decoy to divert attention. Next, it was time for a battle of wits. Actually, it's very simple, because I, like you, believe that the entire incident was not an individual act by Henrik. Fu Qian said something shocking. What do you mean? Yuan Shan was initially shocked, her tone settling down, but her gaze remained cold. Don't tell me, you've been staying at the base all this time just to enjoy the privilege of leadership. I came to Shangjing intending only to live a leisurely life and incidentally look after an old friend's daughter. But after learning about some of the circumstances, I couldn't help but become suspicious. Go on. I once dealt with a man named Lu Ming and witnessed some strange research. And some of the things I witnessed at the banquet led me to some bad associations, and I wanted to confirm what exactly had been stolen. Fu Qian chose to use the Rebirth Club as a shield. Lu Ming. Yuan Shan narrowed her eyes. Yes, an old man without a single hair on his head, always obsessed with experiments like stitching together bodies and limbs. Rebirth Club. You know about it too. Why wouldn't I know about it? Yuan Shan snorted. That bunch of lunatics caused havoc at sea, turning the area into a place of chaos and darkness. I'm very clear about these happenings. However, it's said that an accident occurred there 3 months ago. Not only was Bai Jinting from the White Tower Group assassinated, but the Rebirth Club also suffered heavy losses, including the destruction of their laboratories. Your acquaintance should have also died in that accident. Unfortunately, due to the special nature of the Ring Islands and Ibu's tight lockdown on information, we know very little about what exactly happened, only that the assassin hasn't been caught to this day. Actually, I'm that person too. Fu Qian thought to himself. But based on such an unfounded guess, you rashly invaded the Night Watchman base and even went as far as to take lives. Yuan Shan glared. First of all, I originally intended only to sneak in for a look, and secondly, I haven't taken anyone's life. Fu Qian waved his hand. At the time, the young girl and 2 guards I knocked out weren't seriously hurt. I had purposely controlled the force of my attack to ensure it wouldn't be fatal. What Yuan Shan said about wounding 3 people just now confirmed that. As for the Tendril Barrage Devastator, I merely demolished a house, and with the Night Watchman's wealth and power, they shouldn't mind too much, right? The point isn't that, but rather after that incident I started being watched. For instance, I encountered a strange assassination attempt last night. This morning, I even ran into Henrik, and although Wenli truly could be considered his prey, isn't the coincidence a bit too peculiar? An assassination attempt. That's right. Fu Qian recounted the incident involving the maid and the rabbit. That talking rabbit, I believe, was not the work of Henrik. Yuan Shan fell into deep thought. Continue. So, I'm increasingly convinced that Henrik's defection isn't so straightforward, that someone else is behind it, manipulating events. Because of my unusual actions, they noticed me and decided to eliminate me as an unpredictable factor. Although I'm still not certain who they are or what their aim is, in my view, Henrik is nothing but a tool being used. After staring for a long while, Yuan Shan finally nodded, and the murderous intent about her eased somewhat. Have you heard of the Native Council? The Native Council. That was an unfamiliar term. Fu Qian shook his head. It's normal not to know. Unlike the Rebirth Club that is out in the open, the Native Council is a secret organization, heavily veiled. Compared to the Rebirth Club, the Native Council is even more unscrupulous in their actions. Many incidents involving corruption and curses are tied to them, and they have always been our top target for eradication. So you suspect that they are orchestrating this affair? Yuan Shan had indeed harbored suspicions all along. I never believed Henrik would do such a thing, but without proof, my hands were tied. The information you've brought, if true, could serve as corroboration. If that's the case, Henrik will probably be abandoned soon. Fu Qian silently made that deduction. Henrik had already almost completely lost his sanity, rendering him incapable of divulging further information. If the Native Council's goal was solely the Thorn blood, then they would likely dispose of him at an opportune moment. In fact, I think his current actions serve to draw attention for those behind the scenes. Is that also why you've been unwilling to leave the Night Watchman base, worrying about being lured away from the real target? Yes, one reason is I'm unsure of their motives, and another is that this thing has been unstable. Yuan Shan pointed to the room that had been securely sealed off, then added a few more strips. After the object was taken, the remaining parts of the corpse underwent a severe mutation, not only transforming the vicinity into this state but even subtly affecting other sealed-off corpses. Because of this, I've had to continuously deal with it, but now it's mostly stabilized. We just have to wait for headquarters to dispatch someone to deal with this completely. I see. Fu Qian nodded. But you're quite impressive. Suddenly a smile appeared on Yuan Shan's face. I appreciate a man who acts without reservations. Are you interested in joining the Night Watchman? No. Fu Qian replied decisively. I'm just a bookstore owner. You might want to hear about the benefits first before dismissing the idea so hastily. Yuan Shan's eyes danced, about to say more, when her expression suddenly became serious as she walked to the side. After a moment, she came back and looked at Fu Qian. They've found Henrik. Chapter 121, Chapter 121, Chapter 120 Hunter's Thirst for Blood, 20_1. Chapter 121, Chapter 120 Hunter's Thirst for Blood, 20_1. So, bookstore owner, are you interested in joining me for some demon hunting? Inside the sealed area, Yuan Shan wore a smile as she stared at Fu Qian. Can I say I'm not interested? No, you can't. Fu Qian hadn't even finished asking when Yuan Shan directly responded. You must come with me. You think I would let you out of my sight while I'm away from the base? I knew it. Fu Qian sighed. The previous conversation had only served to lower Yuan Shan's guard a bit. It was essentially going from, my old lady wants to slap you to death, to, I'll spare your life to see how things go. After all, I am someone with a history of barging into the Night Watchman base. At such a sensitive time, how could Yuan Shan possibly let me out of her control? If the base lacked a demigod to oversee it, and I really had malicious intentions, it could still likely cause chaos. Don't be fooled by Yuan Shan's seemingly approachable demeanor. She's the Night Watchman in charge in Shangjing, wielding the power of life and death over the supernatural world. Yuan Shan would never take such a risk, and that was non-negotiable. However, the upside was that I had intended to go anyway. My question was merely a formality. After all, my current reputation is that of a lofty hermit, and being too eager would raise suspicions. Let's set off then. Actually, I'm quite curious myself. That's more like it. After reinforcing the seals again, Yuan Shan had an old man watch over them and, after briefly instructing him, she gestured for Fu Qian to leave. This time they didn't take the route they came by, but a narrow stone corridor instead. They moved upward, and when they emerged on the ground, Fu Qian found himself in a spacious hall, surrounded by black stone structures. The black spire in the middle of the base. Fu Qian's mind raced as he guessed their current location. Indeed, there were many passages below, far more than just one. Last time, Yuan Shan had likely taken a shortcut to intercept me. Keep an eye on him, but don't rush into action. Wait for me to get there before you do anything. Did I forget something? Hearing Yuan Shan giving commands on the other end, Fu Qian frowned slightly, remembering something. Wenli was still waiting outside Yuan Shan's office. Forget it. It's better to let her stay there. At this moment in Shangjing, there was northwest safer place than there. The location provided by Poker Face was quite remote. They zipped along, and just as they were about to reach their destination, Yuan Shan, who had been all smiles, suddenly changed her expression. Is there a situation? Fu Qian frowned, then quickly heard the sound of combat from afar. Yuan Shan rushed forward immediately, and Fu Qian, following behind, saw that a fight had already broken out up ahead. In addition to Poker Face, Fu Qian saw another familiar figure, the old master Chen Xing, who had taken action at the banquet. A crowd was spectating, and the two of them were teaming up to grapple with Henrik. Chen Xing had not used his ability to slow others' movements, perhaps out of concern for hitting allies. Henrik, covered in scars, was still as quick as lightning with extremely fierce attacks, managing to keep the two fourth phasers subdued. Apart from Poker Face and the team led by Chen Mingda, many others had gathered, likely brought by Chen Xing. The vitality of a demigod is truly formidable. Fu Qian watched from the side, impressed. After sustaining such serious injuries earlier, he still retained such power. Step back. Facing the tangled battle between the three, Yuan Shan stepped forward 2 steps, expressionlessly raising her hand. In the next moment, a black giant net appeared out of nowhere, engulfing Henrik from all directions. Could it really be activated so quickly? Fu Qian admired with astonishment. From their last encounter, he knew all too well how difficult Yuan Shan's move was to handle. Witnessing this scene, the onlooking crowd first froze in unison, then burst into cheers. The arrival of Yuan Shan undoubtedly injected a strong dose of encouragement into everyone, significantly lightening the mood. And upon hearing Yuan Shan's voice, Poker Face and Chen Xing retreated immediately. The black net ensnared Henrik at the center of the battle, then swiftly constricted. Ah! Unexpectedly, amidst the piercing screams, the intangible, shadow-like net was forcibly torn open by Henrik, creating a huge hole. However, before he could escape the confines, another giant net enveloped him. Yuan Shan, expressionless, didn't give Henrik another chance to tear through. One after another, the black nets rapidly bound him, wrapping him up into a thick cocoon. Finally, he fell to the ground, leaving only his head exposed. What's going on? Didn't I tell you not to act yet? Yuan Shan didn't rush forward to check but instead glanced at Poker Face, who had already pulled back. We were indeed following at a distance. The latter's face turned awkward. Unexpectedly, he turned back and started attacking us, so we had no choice but to act early. Is that so? Yuan Shan said nothing more and simply nodded before turning to Chen Xing beside her. Patriarch Chen, you have worked hard. He has slain many Qin clan youngsters, I am duty-bound. Chen Xing's tiger-like eyes glimmered with killing intent as he coldly watched the still struggling Henrik. For this, I express my deep apologies. Yuan Shan said nothing more and walked directly towards the bound Henrik. Seeing his twisted, deformed body and the dense, terrifying scars on it, Yuan Shan, who always seemed to bear a graceful smile, flashed a touch of pain in her eyes. The struggling of the latter had already ceased, as he looked blankly at Yuan Shan, his body trembling uncontrollably. Henrik! Yuan Shan softly called out, attempting to communicate with him. Before she could continue, Henrik suddenly clutched his head and let out a tragic howl, then began to struggle wildly again. Be careful. Poker Face was the first to rush forward, preventing any abnormalities from occurring with Henrik. In the midst of relentless struggling, Henrik's body began to change drastically. His body elongated and deformed again, almost losing any resemblance to a human, as numerous sharp bone spikes emerged from within him. Amidst a desperate burst of strength, the demigod-level constraints were shattered, revealing the peeling flesh beneath. Gaining his freedom, Henrik lunged backward with a body on the brink of collapse, and screams erupted all around. The next moment, the entire area slowed down tremendously, as if sinking into sticky syrup. Chen Xing, who had been attentively watching him, stood in his way. The sudden activation of the ability unavoidably affected the devil-like Henrik, slowing him down for an instant. Though it was brief, it was enough. Chen Xing lunged forward with a strange movement, striking Henrik's skull forcefully. A crisp cracking sound echoed, and Henrik, already at his limit, finally crashed to the ground. With sounds of joints bursting like bamboo all over his body, his form could no longer hold together and began to disintegrate piece by piece. Chapter 122, Chapter 122, Chapter 121, The Hunter Craves for Blood, 21_1. Chapter 122, Chapter 121, The Hunter Craves for Blood, 21_1. Demigods are indeed different. Despite having already disintegrated into mush, the flesh still struggled and writhed. Fu Qian couldn't help but sigh. This was the first time he had seen a transcendent of such a level die before him. Fu Qian began to understand why there were places like the Forbidden Zones. Letting such abominable things scatter outside was simply too dangerous. But the situation before him finally confirmed his speculation. Even though Henrik had been smashed to pieces, he still hadn't seen anything resembling thorn blood. He had been right not to kill him at the time. The poker faces were obviously well trained, and they immediately signaled people to get Henrik's remains under control. Yuan Shan looked up in the direction Henrik had charged, her face grimmer than ever, and she remained silent for a long time. The two Qinmingda brothers were standing over there. Following their gaze, Fu Qian noticed Qinmingda surveying between himself and Yuan Shan, looking rather odd. "Chief Yuan, if there's no issue, I'll take my leave now." Qin Xing approached, coughed, his face showing a sense of relief after revenge had been obtained. However, the latter did not respond, still staring coldly at the two Qinmingda brothers. "You also find it suspicious?" Henrik's last outburst was indeed strange. "Brother Mingda, are you all right?" Fu Qian walked up to him and greeted Qinmingda. "Brother Fu, I didn't expect you to also come," replied Qinmingda with a strained smile. "Upon receiving the information, Chief Yuan and I rushed over immediately," said Fu Qian, deliberately phrasing his words to be easily misunderstood. "I'm pleased to see you here." "What do you mean?" Qinmingda frowned, not understanding what Fu Qian was getting at. His question was answered by a whip that came lashing towards him. "What are you doing?" Qinmingda, shocked and unable to dodge, took a hit square on his face, leaving a long red welt. "Nothing in particular," replied Fu Qian as he stepped forward again and lashed out with another whip. "You dare!" Chen Xing, witnessing this scene, couldn't help but let out an enraged roar. Just as he was about to step in, two intersecting black bands blocked his path. "Chief Yuan, what is the meaning of this?" "Who is this guy?" demanded Chen Xing, not expecting Yuan Shan to stop him, his voice filled with indignation. As he saw Qinmingda retreating step by step, powerless against Fu Qian. "Even if he is the night watchman, he has no right to assault a member of the Chen clan like this," he said. But before he could finish, an irate roar echoed through the air. Qinmingda stopped retreating, his arms grotesquely swelling to several times their normal size, blocking Fu Qian's next strike. This horrifying sight made Chen Mingfei scream out loud. "Shut up!" Qinmingda lifted his head, his eyes a bloody red. With a voice filled with brutality, Chen Mingfei's head was sliced in half, revealing a trembling tongue in his mouth. "Mingda, why would you?" Seeing Chen Mingfei's half-corpse, Chen Xing's eyes burned with rage. "Why?" Chen Mingda, looking over his body, let out a hoarse cackle. The mutation was no longer confined to his arms, his entire body was unnaturally enlarging and distending. With numerous bumps forming, a multitude of blood vessels emerged on the surface of his skin. "I've worked harder than anyone, but I could never get over that hurdle," he said. "And even this fool had the nerve to mock me." Chen Mingda shook the head of Chen Mingfei in his hand. "What about this idiot could possibly compare with me, yet he dares to be arrogant in front of me every day, even considering himself as the successor of the next generation. There's definitely something wrong with Chen Mingda." At this moment, Fu Qian had already stopped and stepped aside. It seemed his own guess was not wrong, this person's psychology had become twisted after being suppressed for too long. Now it looked like he indeed had something to do with that rabbit. When visiting Wenli, he was also taking the opportunity to test him. Just now, when Henrik seemed to briefly regain his senses, his desperate confrontation was aimed at him. Unfortunately, as the chief doctor of the night watchman, Yuan Shan couldn't take direct action without evidence even if she had suspicions. He himself was not burdened by such concerns. Just a moment ago, through his words, he had deliberately led him to misunderstand that he was in tacit agreement with Yuan Shan, and hinted that they were targeting him. If there were indeed ghosts in his heart, he would definitely think his secrets had been exposed at the first instance. The reason for using the whip was that from previous behavior, Chen Mingda was deep and calculating, and perhaps even mentally strong. In such circumstances, it was best to use a little technique to slightly lower his rationality. Only then would there be a chance for him to slip up. Moreover, a whip was relatively mild, so if there was a misunderstanding, it could possibly be explained as a practice match at the scene. The results proved to be very effective. After several lashes, Chen Mingda exposed himself completely. The tyrant's fist was truly a divine artifact for coercion, in cases where the target's realm wasn't high. Fu Qian looked at the ring on his hand. I have struggled for too long, and when I was on the verge of despair, I was given an opportunity, and I ultimately accepted the deal, said Chen Mingda, looking at Qin Sheng. As long as it could help me overcome that hurdle, I didn't care about the cost, and if I was discovered, I would have no choice but to accept my fate. Fools who deal with them, I have seen too many already. Yuan Shan looked at him coldly. Everything comes at a price. Look at yourself now, you don't even know what you have become. Ridiculous, do you think you are still yourself at this moment? Why not? I feel better than I ever have before, I have waited too long for this moment. Before Chen Mingda could finish speaking, he suddenly let out a scream. His head, which had already swelled up, swelled again and exploded into a bloody mess. Strangely, the body was still standing. Chief Yuan's assessment of us is somewhat biased, came a bizarre voice from the bloodied mess. Although our philosophies differ, the native council is not made up of frauds. If possible, I still hope to complete this transaction. It's a pity, though, that his mental fortitude is still too weak. Moreover, the shattered head turned towards Fu Qian. That thing in your hand is interesting. Is it? Yuan Shan waved her hand, and ribbons enveloped the surroundings. Destroying me is meaningless. This is but one piece of flesh carrying consciousness. Even if pulverized, it would cause me no harm. I've already taken what I came for, in your hands, it's completely wasted. You fundamentally don't understand its preciousness. How precious exactly? Fu Qian suddenly interjected. Are you interested? I might be. Ha ha ha. The voice paused for a moment and then broke into insane laughter. However, the laughter stopped abruptly, as the deformed head was shattered by a punch, splattering into countless blood droplets. Chen Xing, who had thrown the punch, seemed to have aged 10 years in an instant. Chapter 123, Chapter 123, Chapter 122 Hunter's Thirst for Blood, 22_1. Chapter 123, Chapter 122 Hunter's Thirst for Blood, 22_1. The surroundings fell into a silence as of death. Everyone stared at Qin Sheng, splattered with blood. This man, once clothed in luxurious brocades, strong and imposing in appearance, was now forced to personally slay his own son. His face had become ashen to the extreme, in an instant he seemed as frail as an old man at the end of his days. Chief Yuan, I'll take my leave with my people first. After a long while, Qin Sheng slowly raised his head to look at Yuan Shan, his voice hoarse and somber. Mingda's body. I will leave it here. Fine. Yuan Shan nodded but did not say much. Mingda's body was clearly contaminated, and though it was regrettable, it definitely could not be handed over for him to take away. One could say that Qin Sheng at least still had a sense of proportion. After Qin Sheng finished speaking, he bent down once more, casting one more look at the headless corpse next to him, his eyes filled with heavy sorrow. Just then, an abrupt change occurred. Amidst cries of shock, a slender, blood-red tendril shot out lightning fast from Mingda's swollen, severed neck. In almost an instant, the tendril wrapped itself around Qin Sheng's neck. Father. Mingda's voice sounded once again. You're just going to leave me here like this? The flesh tendril tightly coiling around Qin Sheng's neck rapidly sprouted numerous delicate tentacles that wildly extended in all directions, trying to penetrate Qin Sheng's body. Suddenly attacked, Chen Xing was almost instantaneously entangled completely. However, he did not show any panic, he did not even struggle, but just stared fixedly at Mingda's body, looking utterly disheartened. From a distance, Yuan Shan was about to make a move when she suddenly noticed something and stopped. The next moment, a bizarre warping appeared around Chen Xing's body. Everything seemed to freeze, and the blood-colored flesh tendril turned as rigid as stone, motionless. Fu Qian narrowed his eyes from the side. Chen Xing, half kneeling on the ground, emitted an indescribable eeriness as if he were a lifeless puppet. Yet, it was clear that the strength of the aura emanating from Chen Xing was insanely increasing. In the next instant, the myriad of tentacles that had wrapped around his head and face disintegrated into dust almost instantly. The disintegration didn't even end there, it continued to spread, traveling in reverse towards Mingda's body. Amidst piercing screams of agony, the latter began to gradually turn to ash. This is... Everyone watched the scene before them in disbelief. Chen Xing, standing up once more, with neither sorrow nor joy in his eyes, was filled with an indescribable, mysterious aura. Demigod. The thought rose in the minds of the onlookers. Had he ascended? Under the special state of mind brought on by the grief of losing a child, had Chen Xing actually broken through barriers and directly ascended to the legendary status of a demigod? As the initial shock subsided, the excited Qin clan youngsters who had come to their senses could barely contain their excitement. It had been many years since a demigod had emerged from the Qin family, and no one understood the value of a demigod better than they did. For the Qin family, this was an incredibly good fortune. Though the price was somewhat high. Interesting. Before Mingda's body had completely disintegrated, that voice uttered its last remark, then completely dissipated. Alas. Fu Qian from not too far away shook his head. He had been watching Mingda's body the entire time, yet until it was reduced to dust, he still hadn't found what might be the thorn blood. Congratulations. At this time, Yuan Shan breathed a sigh of relief and said softly to Chen Xing. Chen Xing first looked at himself and then turned his gaze towards Qin Mingda, who had completely dissolved, his eyes filled with complexity. After a long while, he gave Yuan Shan a slight nod, not even bothering to greet the Qin clan youngsters, and headed straight toward the distance. He left behind a group of people feeling lost and at a loss. Hesitating for a moment, the Qin clan youngsters gradually followed suit. There was not much left of Qin Mingda's body, but Poker Face still ordered the area to be sealed off. Having looked at Henrik's body for a long time, Yuan Shan surveyed the surroundings and walked over to Fu Qian. I need to thank you, our past grievances are now wiped clean, she said. It was evident that having Henrik proven innocent had eased her mind considerably. Just before, because of Henrik's actions, Yuan Shan indeed had her suspicions about Qin Mingda, but sadly, there was no evidence. However, she had not expected Fu Qian to step forward so directly, without considering the consequences. From his previous actions, she knew this individual acted unusually, but she still hadn't expected him to be so audaciously reckless. Just now, she was even thinking about how to clean up the aftermath. Sometimes, having someone who breaks the rules to get things done isn't so bad. That's good to hear, Fu Qian responded nonchalantly, nodding his head. The grievances mentioned by Yuan Shan clearly referred to his own nighttime intrusion into their base. Who is this guy? Hearing the conversation between the two, the people around them began to look at the situation differently. Looking so young yet having a past conflict with a demigod. And wasn't the posture of this dialogue a bit too superior? Everyone's attention had been drawn to Qin Xing just now, but now they recalled Fu Qian's madcap actions. Without any evidence, he had confidently thrown punches and used bizarre techniques to force Qin Mingda to reveal his true form. Moreover, it seemed like he had an unspoken understanding with Yuan Shan. As he committed the assault, Yuan Shan helped him by blocking Qin Xing. Was this mysterious master who owed Yuan Shan a favor there to help, and was the act he just carried out under Yuan Shan's direction? Combining their conversation, this was the subconscious judgment of most people. The crowd's gaze towards Fu Qian became even more cautious. Have you really not considered joining the night watchman? Yuan Shan asked with a smile. No, if you need help another day, I can offer paid services, Fu Qian replied. Then are you coming back to the base with us? No, you're surely going to be busy, I don't want to add to the crowd, he said. Yes, I have a pile of reports to write, and we must continue arranging the hunt for the native council members. Although, according to their style, they've likely already fled. But aren't you going to pick up Wenli? Why should I go pick up Wenli? Fu Qian asked, perplexed. I'm not her bodyguard and, furthermore, the crisis is over. In Shangjing, I'm just a bookseller after all. All right then. Seeing Fu Qian's firm stance, Yuan Shan didn't linger, waving her hand to lead the majority away. Poker Face and his men cleaned up the remains on the ground, all departing with puzzled glances towards Fu Qian. They simply couldn't figure out when Fu Qian had reached a secret agreement with Yuan Shan. Very soon, only Fu Qian was left alone at the site. All right. The rival had been dealt with, and the mission officially began. Fu Qian watched the direction the night watchman had left in, rubbing his hands together eagerly. This trip seemed unfruitful on the surface, yet in reality, he gained a lot. After proving Henrik's innocence, Yuan Shan unquestionably shifted the blame onto the native council. While they might investigate, it was highly likely that it would only add another charge to the organization's list of crimes, followed by routine operations. Moreover, it was clear that she wasn't particularly fixated on the lost Thorn blood. Under these circumstances, he could finally take action freely. Chapter 124, Chapter 124, Chapter 123, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, 23_1. Chapter 124, Chapter 123, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, 23_1. Fu Qian made his way forward, rapidly sorting through the current information in his mind. He was now highly suspicious of a person, Deng Feizhou. The entire incident had been characterized as a conspiracy by Qin Mingda and the native council. The accepted storyline was that, in order to compensate for innate deficiencies, Qin Mingda had no qualms about collaborating with the native council to help them obtain Thorn blood. In return, the native council helped Qin Mingda break through his bottlenecks. To achieve their goal, they targeted Henrik and eventually devised a scheme to control his mind, stealing the Thorn blood out. Their original plan, undoubtedly, was to make it appear that Henrik had been contaminated by a demigod corpse and stole the Thorn blood. Then to control him to go on a killing spree, becoming a monster that ate human brains, and to be eliminated at the right moment, bringing the whole affair to an end. However, their plan became complicated by an unforeseen variable. They hadn't anticipated someone would break into the night watchman base while everything was proceeding according to plan. And a situation spiraling out of control was definitely not something they wished to see. So they quickly began investigating the matter, and because of his performance at the banquet, he entered their field of vision. This was also why Wenli was being followed. Later, Chen Mingda, under the pretext of paying a visit, came to Wenli's home to probe him. Then there was the strange game, an attempt to test and control him that failed, culminating in their loss of a puppet. The next day, Wenli took him to Deng Feizhou's house, and he deliberately fabricated the issue with Yuan Shan, only for Henrik to show up shortly after they'd left. The timing was too coincidental, giving every reason to believe that Henrik was there to silence him. And only Deng Feizhou knew that he was going to look for Yuan Shan. Afterwards, under the influence of the tyrant's fist, Henrik seemed to regain some of his senses, and Deng appeared timely, seemingly to help, but ultimately let him go. In any case, this Mr. Deng was quite suspicious. Fu Qian quickly arrived at his destination, Deng Feizhou's residence. He mimicked Wenli and pressed the doorbell. After a minute, the door opened from the inside, Deng Feizhou looking at Fu Qian expressionlessly. Mr. Fang, why have you come alone? Where is Wenli? Please don't worry, she's now in a safe place. As for why I came, it's simple. Fu Qian blinked. I want to make a deal with you. I don't understand what you mean. Deng Feizhou's tone didn't fluctuate, though his gaze inadvertently glanced behind Fu Qian. Relax, there are no night watchmen behind me. Fu Qian squeezed directly through the open door. The next moment, the sound of wind came from behind. Without hesitation, Fu Qian raised his hand, and the tentacles forming the biochemical demon arm lashed out fiercely. You. The forces collided, and Deng Feizhou staggered back several steps, looking at Fu Qian's arm in astonishment. There was indeed a problem. Having confirmed his suspicions, Fu Qian looked at Deng Feizhou, who had attempted to ambush him, with a smile. Why the hurry? Why not listen to the terms of the deal first? As you can see, I'm facing some difficulties. Fu Qian deliberately controlled his arm, allowing it to slowly revert to its original form. I've tried many methods, but the results weren't very satisfactory, so I want to make a deal with you. Deng Feizhou watched the tentacles on Fu Qian's arm, saying nothing. A deal similar to the one with Chen Mingda. Fu Qian added another sentence. Can we sit down and talk about it now? I must say, you've brought me quite a few surprises. After staring at Fu Qian for a long time, Deng Feizhou finally spoke. Do young people nowadays enjoy hiding their strength so much? It's always better to stay low-key. Chen Mingda is but a low-phase transcendent, while you are at least fourth phase. Don't tell me you want me to help you become a demigod. Is that not possible? I'm an outsider when it comes to the affairs in Shangjing. Do you know the benefit of being an outsider? It's that one can analyze the situation more objectively and comprehensively. For example, no matter the conspiracy, there always has to be a beneficiary. And right now, in the whole theft incident, Henrik is dead, Chen Mingda is dead, and the night watchman's items have been stolen. The Native Council is undoubtedly the biggest winner. And just now, I suddenly realized that there is actually another person who has gained a benefit. Fu Qian smiled. That would be Chen Xing. As soon as these words were spoken, Fu Qian keenly noticed a flicker in Deng Feizhou's eyes. It seems I'm not wrong, huh? For a man of great ambition, no sacrifice is too great. To rise to a demigod, he even sacrificed his son. Go on. What a drama it's been today. Fu Qian stroked his chin. An old transcendent enduring the pain of losing his son, losing all hope, then experiencing an epiphany and breaking through years of shackles to become a demigod. What an exciting script, so much so that even the night watchmen were convinced. Was this part of the plan you devised with Chen Xing? Chen Mingda probably had no idea he was just a sacrificial pawn until he died, huh? Fu Qian said this while looking thoughtfully at Deng Feizhou. However, I'm not interested in that. You just need to tell me what it would take to exchange for the method to become a demigod. So you really want to ascend to a demigod? The pursuit of ascension is every transcendent's duty, not a choice, it's a duty. Ha ha ha. Deng Feizhou was taken aback by Fu Qian's reply but then suddenly burst out laughing. You're quite impressive. Good strength, and the right temperament too. However, it's a pity that you've got something wrong. What's that? Fu Qian's eyes lit up. The thing Henrik brought out is not the goal, but the means. So that's it. I understand now. Fu Qian's face showed his realization. So the item isn't what you're after, it's something used to help Chen Xing ascend. That's very strange then, even if you were willing to help for no reason. A trade that obviously has no benefit to you, Chen Xing would actually agree to it. Because he had no choice. The Chen family needed a demigod, and it's not as if I wanted nothing in return. So, if you want to achieve the same goal, you need to offer something that's interesting enough to me. The thorn blood actually has been consumed. Fu Qian lamented in his heart. But the fact that his mission was not yet a failure meant that there was still a chance. Fu Qian thought for a moment. So you're saying that now, not only do I need to propose a satisfactory offer to you, but I also have to find the material from a demigod's corpse at the Night Watchman base. It's not there anymore. Deng Feizhou shook his head. There was only that one portion in the Night Watchman base, so that method won't work anymore. Only one portion. Then I have a question. Fu Qian's brow furrowed slightly before he suddenly slapped his forehead. Is it possible that I could kill old Master Chen and take the item to have you help me ascend? Deng Feizhou was momentarily silent, clearly startled by Fu Qian's off-the-wall thinking. Can I? Fu Qian looked forward expectantly. Ha ha ha. Deng Feizhou laughed loudly again. Sure, if you have the ability to kill a true demigod. The item will be released from his body again, and then you can bring it to me. This is the answer I was looking for. Fu Qian sighed heavenward. Chapter 125, Chapter 125, Chapter 124, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, 24_1. Chapter 125, Chapter 124, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, 24_1. Your condition is indeed very interesting. Did the whip come about in the same way? By now, Deng Feizhou had relaxed and was carefully sizing up Fu Qian. No. Fu Qian shook his hand, showing off the tyrant's fist. Actually, it's the effect of this thing. Got it by a rather accidental chance. A very interesting object, containing the power of a curse. Looking at the uniquely shaped ring, Deng Feizhou's face showed no surprise. Instead, he nodded with a smile. This guy had already figured it out, he was testing me earlier. Fu Qian thought to himself. As expected, quite a handful. Lucky for me, I've always maintained good virtues, honesty. Only lie when absolutely necessary. Moreover, from Deng Feizhou's words, Fu Qian also discerned other implications. Do you know everything the puppet sees? Quick response. Deng Feizhou gave him an appreciative look. That's right, anything experienced by the person I possess, I can share all of their perceptions, even when in a dormant state. Then I'm really sorry for stepping on and crushing your body, it must have hurt a lot. It's okay, after all, I initiated the probe. Deng Feizhou's smile didn't diminish. You don't have to test me. The death of a puppet does have a certain impact on me, but it's far from severe. I misjudged the situation at the Wenli residence, your ability to conceal your presence is quite impressive. Thank you for the compliment, just a habit of keeping a low profile. What about Chen Mingda? Does he know he's possessed by you? Chen Mingda, of course, has no idea. Although he's a bit extreme, he isn't stupid. Actually, I don't really like doing this kind of thing, as it's like splitting a part of myself away. The sensation of tearing flesh and even soul is quite uncomfortable. As Deng Feizhou patiently explained, he lifted his right hand and spread his fingers. Soon, as if the bones inside were melting, the 5 fingers began to twist and wriggle. Like writhing pieces of flesh, the 5 fingers eventually pulled themselves off the palm bit by bit. After crawling around the bare edges of the palm for a few laps, the fingers fused back with the skin, eventually vanishing into the palm. At the front of the palm, 5 new fingers grew back. Why does this seem so eerily familiar? Witnessing the scene, Fu Qian couldn't help but exclaim internally. No wonder his attitude toward me changed so rapidly when I showed off. The biochemical demon arm, he saw me as one of his kind. Phew. Deng Feizhou let out a breath after finishing the demonstration, looking at Fu Qian. After so many years, it still feels slightly uncomfortable every time. The part of me in Chen Mingda is almost certainly impossible to recover. But in order to prevent him from spouting nonsense before he dies, I had to make a sacrifice. It's also to make Qin Xing's promotion seem more natural, right? Exactly. In the face of Fu Qian's question, Deng Feizhou candidly admitted. Chen Xing can't suppress his state forever. And a demigod's promotion is always a significant event at any time. As the head of a family, with countless eyes on him, suddenly breaking through after being stuck at a bottleneck for so long, to avoid suspicion, a suitable reason was needed. I see, thank you for sharing. Fu Qian nodded. Hey, do you know why I'm telling you all this? Deng Feizhou looked at Fu Qian. Isn't it because I'm your new client? Do you think just anyone has the qualifications to deal with me? Deng Feizhou huffed coldly, his eyes becoming sharp in an instant. Actually, it's very simple, because you're a genius. Deng Feizhou looked at Fu Qian. You've somehow advanced to the 4th phase without clearly understanding the method. And there has been no sign of you losing control or collapsing. Before I met you, I couldn't imagine such a thing. Do you know why our organization is called the Native Council? Why? Because what we do is the greatest feat in human history, an attempt to completely free humanity from its shackles. The greatest treasures are hidden within the body, yet humans sit on a gold mine without realizing it. For years, people have only acted according to instinct, indulged in power and wealth, never to explore and think. Even when transcendent powers emerged, they were quickly attributed to the luck of a few. Most people still lead mediocre lives and fade away in their shackles. In fact, compared to the immense potential contained within the human body, cultivation, talent, and special abilities are nothing but laughable conclusions drawn by a bunch of dullards. Your words remind me of an old friend. Fu Qian suddenly said, facing the impassioned Deng Feizhou. Oh. An old gentleman named Lu Ming, who likes to engage in limb attachment work. He also believes it's a great invention for the liberation of humanity. You know Lu Ming? Deng Feizhou looked at Fu Qian with interest. Did he not invite you to be his limb attachment subject? He did, but I refused. I detest adding parts to my body. Fu Qian answered quickly. As ridiculous as your reason is, you're wise. The Rebirth Club may possess some exploratory spirit, but it is a pity that their concept is completely outdated. They give up exploring human potential and instead chase after a hybrid with transcendent beings, an idea proven foolish long ago, yet they cannot bear to abandon it. Of course, compared to the Night Watchman's antiquated minds, they are much better. Deng Feizhou seemed quite familiar with limb attachments. All right, I've understood your philosophy. In fact, I'm not that concerned about this. Can you now tell me what is needed to exchange for the method to ascend to demigod status? Fu Qian said directly. Don't be so impatient, young man. Deng Feizhou looked at him. You will soon realize that our goal is far beyond what you call a demigod. But right now, my goal is to become a demigod. Without concrete facts before me, I won't believe anyone, and my patience is limited. Fu Qian watched Deng Feizhou coldly. It won't take long, just a few more minutes. Deng Feizhou pointed at the wall clock and let out a deep chuckle. Your troubles will soon disappear. What do you mean? Following Deng Feizhou's directing gaze, Fu Qian looked up at the wall clock and caught on to something. Are you stalling for time? You caught me. We're waiting for a friend. Deng Feizhou sat down leisurely, with a smile on his face. What makes you think you can just barge in here and be in a position to make a deal with me? In fact, even Qinxing doesn't know what the real price of his actions is. Who? Fu Qian looked at Deng Feizhou and let out a long breath. Is Qinxing the one coming? Yes, we agreed to meet at 8 o'clock sharp, or else I would have left Shangjing by now. The Night Watchman will eventually track me down, Deng Feizhou blinked. Qinxing is always punctual. You'll see him soon, or you could try running away. In other words, in less than 10 minutes, he would face a Deng Feizhou plus a newly ascended demigod. Fu Qian glanced around and noticed there seemed to be invisible walls surrounding him, trapping him in place. Even a demigod can't break this in a short time, so I'd advise you not to waste your energy. Also, I really meant what I said before, you are indeed good material. I'll have Qinxing try not to damage it, as I plan to make good use of it afterward. I see. So I only have a few minutes. Once Deng Feizhou was done boasting, Fu Qian finally spoke. That's right. I see. Fu Qian suddenly blinked. How do you know I'm not just stalling for time? 3 minutes, and your ashes will be scattered. Chapter 126, Chapter 126, Chapter 125, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, 25_1. Chapter 126, Chapter 125, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, 25_1. Haha. Fu Qian's words made Deng Feizhou stunned for a moment, then he couldn't help but burst into laughter. Well, I do want to see that. He had spoken only half his words when he suddenly widened his eyes, staring at Fu Qian. The latter actually stood up with an unfazed expression and even took a couple of steps. How is that possible? I clearly had him trapped. Deng Feizhou stared at Fu Qian in disbelief. The next moment, a brilliant torch appeared in his field of vision. The golden, resplendent light enveloped Fu Qian's body, making him look like a deity for a moment, compelling one to almost bow down in worship. How can this be? Almost instantly, Deng Feizhou felt his thoughts becoming like rusty gears, only able to turn at a snail's pace, his consciousness filled with that holy, dazzling light. How can this be? Dealing with someone like you, how could I not make some extra preparations? Fu Qian shook his head as he stepped forward, his finger gun erupted, directly piercing through the latter's waist. From the moment he entered the door and countered Deng Feizhou's probe, using the cover of the biochemical demon arm, he had casually activated the decree residue. Under normal circumstances, this skill is undoubtedly a waste. Not only does it take effect extremely slowly, but the opponent is also a transcendent, making the effect even weaker. But the advantage brought by it was that it was not easy to detect. Fu Qian merely thought there was no harm in trying, so he gave it a try on a whim. Actually, I didn't expect you to cooperate so much, so when I realized you were deliberately dragging out the time, I simply chatted with you a bit longer. As it turned out, Deng Feizhou had an extended conversation without any awareness. So, at such a close distance and over such a period of time, it finally had some effect. Originally, Fuqian wasn't sure how much effect the decree residue would have. It wasn't until Deng Feizhou had just trapped him with a secretly laid trap, leaving a huge loophole without realization, that Fuqian confirmed it had taken effect. Therefore, Fuqian immediately initiated his mythical form after the other party laid out his cards. Praise the sun ×1. With the accumulated effects from before, Chen Feizhou's mental defenses were finally breached. However, Deng Feizhou was already in a confused state of consciousness and wouldn't understand even if he could hear. Fuqian wasn't going to explain in detail to him anyway. This was an opportunity fought for with a point of SAN points. How could he waste it on idle talk? Looking at Deng Feizhou's pierced body, Fuqian didn't even withdraw his hand, directly executing the visceral critical strike. Blood splattered. Deng Feizhou slowly lowered his head, numbly looking at the terrifying wound on his body. Around the edge of the wound, numerous pink flesh buds wriggled, attempting to heal the severely damaged body. Only then did he finally feel a hint of pain. However, before he could say anything, an invisible air bullet shattered his head the next moment. Deng Feizhou's body fell to the ground. In the pool of blood on the floor, pieces of flesh quickly gathered, trying to reassemble with unimaginable vitality. But in a state of dissipating consciousness, the more it attempted, the less human it became, eventually turning into a ball muddled with blood and flesh. Fuqian didn't hesitate to perform another visceral critical strike. After 3 consecutive strikes, the writhing flesh finally lost its vitality. This native council heavyweight finally melted into a puddle of colorless liquid, seeping into the floor. Done. Fuqian took a glance at the wall clock and nodded in satisfaction. Only 2.5 minutes had passed. He perfectly fulfilled his earlier promise. Speaking of which, this guy was also quite cunning. He spoke well, praising himself as a rare genius not seen in thousands of years. Behind the scenes, he was just trying to buy time, waiting to kill himself after Qinsheng arrived. In his eyes, I was nothing more than a prime specimen for experimentation. However, to draw my attention, he still revealed quite a bit of valuable information. There was indeed some gain. There was 1 minute left until 8 o'clock. Soon, the newly anointed demigod, Qinsheng, would arrive here. Fuqian thought about it and chose not to escape. Instead, he walked forward to right the tables and chairs that had fallen over. Are you kidding me? How could I possibly walk away when the target was delivering himself to my doorstep? Although the previous skirmish was perilous, the movements weren't extensive, and they'd caused almost no damage to the room. After some tidying up, it appeared unchanged. After doing all this, Fuqian sat down in Deng Feizhou's spot. He didn't even attempt to disguise himself as Deng Feizhou. Fuqian leaned against the chair back, watching the doorway lazily, just waiting for Qinsheng's arrival. At exactly 8 o'clock, the doorbell rang punctually. Fuqian didn't stand up to open the door. Instead, he extended a finger. The tip of his finger swiftly expanded into a tentacle-like extension, deftly opening the door. The newly anointed demigod, Qinsheng, stood outside, looking serious as he gazed inside. Please, come in. Fuqian deliberately didn't retract the tentacle immediately, allowing it to slowly curl back. Qinsheng's gaze stayed almost entirely fixed on it until Fuqian's finger returned to normal, then he stepped inside the house. Hooked. Fuqian was expressionless, but inwardly he was nodding in satisfaction. The reason he didn't try to disguise himself as Deng Feizhou was because the man before him was a demigod. He didn't believe for a moment that a mere wall could block out the other senses, nor did he believe his disguise skill, despite the interference provided by the mask, could fool him. If he had done that, Qinsheng's immediate assumption upon detection would have been that Deng Feizhou had been killed. Then, the most likely outcome would have been that Qinsheng turned tail and fled, leaving Fuqian with little chance of stopping him. Once Qinsheng increased his vigilance back home, finding an opportunity to strike at him would become geometrically more difficult. Therefore, Fuqian chose to sit there as himself, purposely showcasing the tentacle. It was highly likely that Deng Feizhou had shown Qinsheng the trick of his detachable finger before. So, having witnessed this, Qinsheng's first reaction would surely be that I had some connection with Deng Feizhou. Seeing no signs of a struggle in the room, and to understand what had happened, he was very likely to come in to verify the situation. Then, I could pose as another member of the native council. Sit. Fu Qian exhaled and gestured for the other to sit down in front of him. After staring at Fu Qian for a long while, Chen Xing finally sat down. "Where's Deng Feizhou? The night watchman has been a bit too active lately. To avoid any mishaps, he needed to leave first," Fu Qian said, keeping his face emotionless. "Why didn't he tell me ahead of time?" Old Master Chen was clearly on high alert, immediately questioning back. "It was an emergency situation, we needed to minimize suspicious contact." "You're with the Native Council? Is that so surprising? If it weren't for me stepping in just now, do you think you could have allayed Yuan Shan's suspicions?" Fu Qian snorted, implying that his earlier action of hitting Chen Mingda had been by Deng Feizhou's instigation. "Or are you planning on seeking revenge for me killing your son?" "Ha!" Upon mentioning Chen Mingda, a flicker of pain crossed Chen Xing's eyes, followed by a long, resigned sigh. "Rest assured, I still have clarity. For the family, some necessary sacrifices are worth it. The Chen family has been without a demigod for too long, so long that even our own people have started to doubt our bloodline and heritage. Mingda will understand." Chapter 127, Chapter 127, Chapter 126, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, End, _1. Chapter 127, Chapter 126, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, End, _1. Chen Xing's sighs were difficult to tell if they were genuine or not. After all, many people deceive even themselves in order to feel at ease. Fortunately, Chen Xing quickly finished his reflections and looked up at Fu Qian with a determined expression. "Even so, your words still can't be verified, and I will only fulfill the subsequent agreement with Deng Feizhou. That's between you and him, I'm just entrusted to pass the message to you." Fu Qian replied with an indifferent tone. "Very well." Chen Xing nodded, seemingly very satisfied with Fu Qian's response. "Try not to come here for the time being, Chen Feizhou will contact you when appropriate." Fu Qian stood up from his chair and started to walk outside. "I've delivered the message, and I have my own mission, so I'll take my leave now. Who's there?" Mid-sentence, Fu Qian abruptly looked toward the direction of the door. "Someone there." Fu Qian's reaction startled Chen Xing as well, who immediately followed his gaze, but saw nothing. Not only that, his senses also detected nothing. Not right. Realizing something, Chen Xing swiftly turned around. And his chest and abdomen were already struck by a strong gust. Often, the simplest tricks are the most effective. For instance, the old, "Look, there's a plane," trick, with the right timing and performance, it can always fool someone. Fu Qian had first shown his form, then expressed disinterest in the cooperation, promptly passed the message, and decided to leave. All these actions lowered Chen Xing's guard to the absolute minimum. Then, with the simplest of tricks, he shifted his attention. Facing this fleeting opportunity, Fu Qian didn't hesitate to initiate an attack. As of now, it seemed that directly killing this demigod was the only way to complete his mission. It was a formidable challenge, but not entirely impossible. From earlier tests, the effects of the skill in mythical form basically allowed the next hit to possess demigod-level power and form. That is to say, he could certainly achieve a demigod level in attacking. If he could take the initiative, killing a demigod was not out of the question. Of course, the cost was also enormous. Using mythical form even once was equivalent to risking one's own life. In fact, now that he had his target locked on, restarting and going after Chen Xing directly, hoping to kill him before his promotion, was also a tactic to consider. Considering the cost was just one SAN point, it was likely to be even more economical in terms of probability. But that wasn't his style. Real men face challenges head-on. Mythical form. Air bullet. Fu Qian made his move, clean and efficient. He chose the air bullet as his method of attack, the one with the smallest motion and most concealment. Because he had just stood up from his chair, the distance between the two was only about a meter. By the time Chen Xing reacted, the air bullet in demigod form was already blasting in front of him. Overestimating yourself. In the face of the lethal move, Chen Xing showed no sign of panic. With a cold snort, a sense of immobilization much more intense than before at the banquet spread out. The surroundings seemed to freeze in an instant. Fu Qian found his movements becoming incredibly sluggish, his body nearly petrified. Worthy of a demigod. Compared to his intervention at the banquet, this ability had improved significantly. the power of the air bullet would likely be affected to some extent. Almost instinctively, Fu Qian looked down and saw that Qin Shing did not appear to have been hit. However, his body was splattered with white frost, and a piercing cold spread out from there. The extreme cold was so intense, it seemed to solidify the surrounding air, with different colored ice crystals faintly visible. This is... Fu Qian instantly realized what was happening. He had just found it odd that the air bullet, enhanced by the mythical form, had not turned into something like an air cannon. Now, it seemed, its nature might have changed entirely, adding an effect of extreme cold. Under the influence of Qin Shing's ability, the power of the air bullet was diminished, but the effect of the extreme cold was indeed conveyed onto him. The next moment, under Qin Shing's horrified gaze, Fu Qian felt the immobilizing sensation around him dissipate. Qin Shing's waist, starting from the surface of his body, was slowly congealing, clothes, skin, and flesh alike. Even the surface glinted with shimmering ice crystals. Fu Qian didn't hesitate to reach out his hand. His original plan was to prepare for a visceral critical strike, but now he changed his mind, and directly punched the part of Qin Shing that had frozen over. In almost an instant, the extreme low temperature cracked the skin on his arm. The next moment, a teeth-grindingly sickening sound of shattering occurred. Amid the flurry of ice shards, affected by the recoil, Fu Qian's entire forearm disintegrated. To one's relief, the same happened to Qin Shing. There was a ghastly, large hole in his waist. With the strike succeeding, before Fu Qian had time to take his next action, a bestial roar erupted, and Qin Shing's body swelled instantaneously. The hollow space in front of him widened, spreading along the arm and wrapping around it. The next moment, Fu Qian realized he was in a claustrophobic space. From all sides, there were ferocious spikes. It felt as if he had fallen into the mouth of a lamprey. Except, at this moment, each spike was crystal clear, emitting an extreme chill. This guy's fighting instincts are not bad. These are clearly air bullets that hadn't been completely neutralized. Fu Qian quickly came to his senses. Using his own tactics against him. Could it be that your surname was Murong from Gusumo? Facing the encroaching spikes from all directions, Fu Qian snorted. Witness my 600 meridian divine sword. Lifting his head, arching back, extending his arm, bathed in extreme cold, Fu Qian once again activated his mythical form. Tendril Barrage Devastator. Countless tentacles shot out, confronting the advancing spikes. Ice shards flew everywhere, and for a moment, Fu Qian thought he saw eyeballs emerge deep within the spikes. SAN points decrease by 1. At the same time, a notification sounded in his ear. Damn, you're definitely not some proper demigod. Fu Qian roared inwardly, mysteriously losing a point of SAN points, on top of the 4 times he had used mythical form before. This transaction is a huge loss. The next moment, a silent wail rose in his heart. The world brightened before his eyes, and Fu Qian found that he was once again seeing daylight. Phew. Fu Qian's first instinct was to quickly survey his surroundings. Everywhere were limbs and ice chunks he had just shattered, and a few meters away lay a massive, misshapen head. The latter was about the size of a bathtub, lacking facial features but having several enormous holes filled with dense spikes. It seems there's nothing else, it must be this. Fu Qian walked forward, and stomped down on the faintly twitching head. In an instant, juice splattered, and hundreds of glistening objects flew out. Those were a pile of large eyeballs. Each eyeball had a dark tendril at the end, stretching all the way back into the depths of the head. I knew it, something was off. If all demigods are like this, then that's really quite disgusting. Recalling what Deng Feizhou had said before, could this be the price that even Qin Shing didn't know about? Fu Qian searched through the bloody mess and quickly found a dark red, radiating stone. Is this thorn blood? Fu Qian bent down to pick it up. The stone was crystal clear and still warm to the touch. As he handled it, the tendrils snapped one by one, the hundreds of eyeballs stopped wriggling, and quickly ruptured and dried up. The mission still isn't complete. Without hearing a prompt, and while Fu Qian wondered, the stone in his palm turned into a cloud of blood mist and surged onto his face. The next moment, Fu Qian felt a pang in his heart. He reached up to touch his face and directly plucked off a white mask. On the left side of the mask, starkly, there was a patch of dark red stain. Mission complete, containment of number 3-0177 successful. Chapter 128, Chapter 128, Chapter 127 Synchronization _1. Chapter 128, Chapter 127 Synchronization _1. Task Evaluation, Unpredictable Madman. With efforts from many parties, the theft incident finally ended, and the Native Council's list of crimes has grown once more. The night watchman Henrik was proven innocent, but whether there was a trace of his true self in the ruthless killing spree before his death is unknown. The Native Council lost their leader in the Shangjing area. Most perplexingly, they didn't even know how they lost him, which has led them to pay close attention to this matter. Driven by an urgent desire for promotion, Chen Xing ultimately chose to collaborate with criminals, devising a meticulous plan and even willing to sacrifice his own son, but sadly, all was in vain. Thorn blood grew from defiled bodies, a highly condensed form of pollution and error, yet fools mistook it for a high-tier form of life. Elimination, Deng Feizhou, Chen Xing. Special Achievement, completed the assembly of 3-0177. Rewards, SAN points plus 45, Inspiration plus 5. Special Achievement Reward, use rights for 3-0177. Current SAN points 132, current Inspiration 36. Play Event Recap. What? In the string of prompts that rang in his ear, Fuqian keenly sensed something amiss. He quickly flipped back and found that particular special achievement reward. 3-0177, Messenger. Effect, after activation, it will fully synchronize you with the anchored position. Note, in this state, time will pass in sync, and if you are killed, you will truly die. Fully synchronized, truly die. Fuqian frowned, obtaining the use rights for an item in the warehouse was a first for him. After some thought, Fuqian followed the code and soon found the box for 3-0177. He placed his hand on it to open the box, and a blood-stained white mask lay inside prominently. Fuqian tried picking it up, and as he held it in his hand, he felt a compelling urge to put it on his face. After a brief hesitation, he placed it back in the box. There was no rush to research it, better to go home for a meal first. This time, although he had not repeated the labor, it had taken quite a bit of time. Fuqian took off his work ID, the scene before his eyes shifted, and he was instantly back in his familiar living room. Taking out the prepared ingredients from the fridge, Fuqian leisurely cooked himself a meal. These past few days he had been feasting at Wenli's, almost forgetting the taste of home cooking. After eating his fill and having a short rest, Fuqian returned to the warehouse and quickly found the box for 3-0177. This time, without any hesitation, he put it directly on his face. The moment he did, Fuqian felt a strange sensation, as if his connection to the warehouse had become even tighter. When his senses returned, Fuqian found himself lying on a bed. He glanced around and immediately recognized this as the second floor of the bookstore. Subconsciously touching his face, there was no mask. He found the bathroom according to his memory, and in the mirror was his own face. Fuqian controlled his facial features, swiftly switching between his own and Fang Sun's faces. In this state, the mask no longer affected his ability to change his appearance. The effect of concealing his presence, however, was still there. As he was studying this, Fuqian suddenly sensed someone downstairs. Walking down a few steps, he peeked over and took a look. Without knowing when, the bookstore had been repaired, including the front door, which had been replaced anew. Wenli, dressed casually, sat behind the counter, leisurely flipping through a book. The next moment, as if sensing something, Wenli looked up. Invading someone's home is unethical. Fuqian strolled downstairs and approached the counter under Wenli's gaze. Mr. Fu. Wenli looked surprised, her eyes fixated on Fuqian's face. Have you returned? Yes. Fuqian nodded nonchalantly and asked. Have I been away long? Over a month. Wenli smiled, closed the book in her hand, and gestured around. And I'm not breaking in, I'm helping with some repairs. I've received a lot of help from you and have no way to repay it, so I thought I'd fix this place up a bit as a small token of my appreciation. Take a look, are you satisfied? Fuqian looked around. It was clear that Wenli had put a lot of thought into it. While all the damaged areas were completely repaired, the original appearance was preserved as much as possible. That's more troublesome than building a new bookstore. Very nice, thank you. I waited at the night watchman base for a long time, but later Chief Yuan said you had something to do and wouldn't be coming back, and someone was sent to take me home. Seeing that Fu Qian wasn't disgusted, Wenli showed joy and began to talk incessantly. I was worried that you might have had an accident, but since Chief Yuan seemed to be in a good mood, I felt a bit relieved. However, Uncle Deng seemed to have encountered some trouble. His residence got sealed off by the night watchman, and I haven't seen him since. What about old Master Chen? Old Master Chen might have been overcome by grief. After returning, he completely refused visitors and later issued a statement that he would go into seclusion to stabilize his state. He hasn't shown himself since then. That's pretty reasonable. Fu Qian nodded. The Chen family had finally produced a demigod, but then he disappeared just like that. It must be hard for them to accept. Refusing visitors, going into seclusion, wandering, by going through the whole process, they could at least maintain the facade for a while. Mr. Fu, did you come here this time for another secret mission? At this point, Wenli seemed to remember something and asked Fu Qian cautiously. Not this time. Fu Qian glanced at her. It seems his every appearance tends to coincide with an incident, which left a shadow on this girl. No, just browsing around the store. Fu Qian shook his head. Is that so? Wenli, delighted upon hearing this, chatted for a bit more and then left with a smile. Fu Qian looked around and casually picked up a book to flip through. Synchronized time, could it be that by entering in this manner, time in the real world also passes synchronously? Could I seamlessly switch to my bookstore owner's life from now on? If that's the case, wouldn't staying in there for too long make me a missing person? But that's not really a problem. Given my social circle, being missing or not doesn't make much difference. At most, Qin Mingze and the others would not be able to find me, but I do occasionally play at disappearing. He lounged around until sunset, and Fu Qian took off his mask before returning to the warehouse. After putting the mask away, Fu Qian was about to head home when he noticed something odd. Wait a second, where is my work badge? The work badge that was supposed to be around his neck was gone. This. With a sense of something amiss, Fu Qian raised his left hand and discovered a sparkling pattern at his wrist. Had it fused with him? Fu Qian recalled the feeling of the connection deepening. That's not too bad, more convenient than before. Fu Qian tried to focus his attention on it and issued a command to disengage. The next moment, he was back in his bedroom. The first thing Fu Qian did was look outside, only to find that the sun had already set. Indeed, time had passed synchronously in both worlds. While he was reflecting on his discovery, his phone on the table rang timely. Fu Qian picked it up to see it was a call from Qin Mingze. There were already several missed calls prior to this. Are you at home? Yeah. We're coming over to find you, we'll be there soon. Why are you running over here now? Fu Qian was a bit puzzled. There's been a UFO sighting near your place, Xiao Yu and I have agreed to go have a look. Chapter 129, Chapter 129, Chapter 128 How did you take my place, _1. Chapter 129, Chapter 128 How did you take my place, _1. Young people really are full of energy. Listening to young Master Qin's voice on the phone, Fu Qian couldn't help but feel a little emotional. No one had come looking for him since yesterday, and he thought the matter had ended, only to find that the anomaly back then had piqued the curiosity of the masses. But it's better to look on the bright side. If a group of people interpreted it as a UFO rather than the light of Buddha shining on everyone, it at least showed they were more inclined to believe in science, which was quite comforting to him. Although they wouldn't be meeting any aliens. After hanging up the phone, Fu Qian's attention quickly shifted back to the tasks at hand for the day. The process might have been a bit convoluted, but this mission wasn't too arduous and did match the level of a third-phase object. As for the final confrontation with Qin Xing, to tell the truth, this demigod didn't leave a very strong impression on him. At least compared to Yibu and Yuan Shan, this one really didn't cut it. And then there was that bizarre transformation, those eyes spreading out like a peacock's tail feathers. It was hard not to think of the price mentioned by Deng Feizhou. Pity there wasn't an opportunity to learn more. Speaking of which, Qin Xing was really grasping at straws. The strength demonstrated by Deng Feizhou, at most, was that of a fourth-phase peak. Qin Xing actually pinned his hopes on this guy to help him ascend to demigod status. Or maybe he was putting his hopes on Thorn Blood. Fu Qian silently speculated. Chen Xing wasn't stupid, he must have learned something about thorn blood and thus chosen this path. What he believed in was the stature of thorn blood, not Deng Feizhou. Unexpectedly, in the end, thorn blood had merged with the mask he was carrying, forming 3-0177. Regarding the description of 3-0177, from the effects after use, Fu Qian had a bold guess. All his previous containment tasks had taken place in the past of that world. And under the messenger status, he had reached the actual present. Confirming this was simple, he just needed to use the messenger again in a couple of days. Then he would see if there had been any leap forward in time. However, safety must be a priority when using this. In the messenger status, he would truly die. That is to say, he only had one life and needed to be more cautious in his actions. The upside was that he could remove the mask at any time to end the messenger status. With his current strength, he had the power to fight even a demigod. The effects of the mythical form had also been mostly tested. As long as he remained vigilant and didn't encounter any twisted first or second phase beings, he should at least have the chance to flee. After quickly sorting through his thoughts, Fu Qian tidied up his things, and soon there was a knock at the door. "You guys really are idle." Looking at Qin Mingze and Wu Qingyu outside the door, Fu Qian couldn't help shaking his head and sighing. "You don't know Jack." Qin Mingze's tone was very excited. As expected of young people, just a few days since the last incident, young Master Qin had already stepped out of the shadow of the black dress incident and was once again shining like a litigant. This isn't some third-rate sci-fi story. Many residents nearby said they saw the flash, not to mention those 5 are still lying in the hospital. If it wasn't for the area still being sealed off this morning, half of Linqing's sci-fi fans would probably run over there. This is a big event that happened right by us, aren't you the slightest bit curious? Absolutely not. Fu Qian quietly thought to himself, then turned to look at Wu Qingyu beside him. Are you a sci-fi enthusiast as well? No. Wu Qingyu was still that same half-dead-looking figure, responding very succinctly. I'm not interested in sci-fi stories, though I might be a bit curious if those 5 victims are willing to let me have a look. But I'm insisting to my teacher that I am, so I can slack off and get a break to enjoy a real Saturday night. Understood. Fu Qian patted the latter's shoulder. Have you had dinner yet? Young Master Qin looked at Fu Qian. No. That's just perfect. Xiao Yu and I have already eaten, so let's head out. The logic skills of a litigation trainee truly reached perfection. But Fu Qian didn't fuss about it. Not to mention skipping a meal, going without food for 10 days or half a month wasn't a problem for him now. Despite the short distance, young Master Qin insisted on driving no matter what. 10 minutes later, the trio arrived near the stone bridge. By now, night had fallen, and from a distance, the 5 people's car was no longer on the bridge. It must have been towed away. However, young Master Qin wasn't lying. Normally deserted, the stone bridge still had a scattered crowd of dozens even at this hour. A quick glance revealed that apart from the professionals waiting with their cameras, the rest were young people around 20 years old, probably students from nearby schools who had come to join the excitement. Fu Qian even recognized 2 familiar faces among them. Pei Yanqing and He Xian were unmistakably among the crowd. Indeed, the curiosity of young girls is boundless. With just one look, young Master Qin became quite sentimental. Suddenly, I miss my school days. Mr. Fu. At that moment, Pei Yanqing in the crowd had already spotted Fu Qian and was excitedly waving, attracting sideways glances from those around her. Mr. Fu, is she calling you? Qin Mingze looked over incredulously. Yes. Fu Qian didn't intend to explain too much and casually walked onto the bridge, nodding to Pei and He. You can call me Fu Qian. After greeting the 2 women, Fu Qian briefly introduced Qin Mingze and his companion. Your popularity with women seems a bit exaggerated lately. Seizing the opportunity, Qin Mingze whispered to Fu Qian. What's so strange about that? Fu Qian glanced at him. Don't use your hobbies to challenge other people's professions. Qin Mingze was left speechlessly raw by that retort. I didn't realize you were a sci-fi enthusiast. Looking at Pei Yanqing, Fu Qian slightly furrowed his brow. Honestly, he really didn't want her anywhere near him now. I'm not. Pei Yanqing giggled, pointing to her best friend. Xian dragged me here. She's more interested in these kinds of things, but she's scared now that it's dark. Scared? Yeah. They say 5 people went mad mentally, so the rumors are getting more and more mysterious. Even suggestions that they've been subjected to some sort of secret experiment that fried their brains. Apparently, their condition is not optimistic now, with their intelligence basically regressed to infant level. You were nearly there once. Fu Qian glanced at her, saying nothing. There's no need to pity them. At this point, young Master Qin snorted, his face filled with a cold sneer. Those 5 were never good people, causing trouble all the time. I certainly don't believe they came here to admire the moon. In a sense, even if it was aliens, it would be a public service. Although, I think it's more likely they just drank too much fake booze. Young Master Qin, as someone in the business, clearly knew quite a bit of insider information. And his guess was pretty close to the truth. Is that so? Pei Yanqing and Xian frowned upon hearing this. Obviously, they had no idea that the incident started because of them. Fu Qian didn't say anything and expressionlessly surveyed his surroundings. The next moment, his gaze sharpened, and he took a deep breath. He finally knew why something felt off. The spot where Pei Yanqing was standing was exactly where he had stood the night before, down to the last inch. Chapter 130, Chapter 130, Chapter 129, Evil Thing _1. Chapter 130, Chapter 129, Evil Thing _1. How long have you been here? Gazing at Pei Yanqing's well-proportioned and straight long legs beneath her jeans, Fu Qian suddenly asked. We've been here for quite a while. Pei Yanqing covered her mouth and laughed. Although I'm not interested in aliens, taking a walk is quite nice. Just standing here gives me a magical feeling, and I inexplicably feel at ease. I feel like tonight's moon is especially bright. A magical feeling. Feeling at ease. Really? Fu Qian replied casually, looking up at the sky. Which of your eyes sees any difference with the moon tonight? However, as his glance swept by, he noticed that in the moonlight, everyone including Qin Mingzi looked intoxicated with an indescribable enchantment. Even Wu Qingyu, who seemed on the verge of collapse, now had a look of longing. Trouble. Fu Qian took a deep breath. Looking back at Pei Yanqing, he noticed her ethereal expression as she stared directly at the handrail beside her. The bridge was the old-fashioned arch type, with railings made of green stone on both sides, each pillar carved with stone lions of various shapes. However, due to years of weathering, most were severely damaged. For instance, the one in front of them had only half a head remaining. Seemingly aware of Fu Qian's gaze, Pei Yanqing's lips curved in a secretive smile as she leaned in quietly. Don't you think? She surveyed the surroundings, then pointed at the stone lion in front of them. This lion is so bright. I even felt like it was alive just now. Do you think it's my eyes or my brain that has an issue? Neither your brain nor your eyes have an issue. Fu Qian had already noticed the anomaly. At this moment, the surface of the stone lion indeed emitted a faint, almost imperceptible glow, which wasn't obvious under the naturally white moonlight. That Pei Yanqing could directly see this was probably related to her past experiences. Because of the effects of the decree residue, she had become unusually sensitive to certain things. As for it coming alive, the faint glow on its surface was subtly flickering, which gave it a translucent and eerie appearance. Fu Qian was certain that he had not seen this anomaly when he was here yesterday. The emergence of this phenomenon was likely related to yesterday's events. He had released a skill here once, the mythical form enhanced commandment residue. This anomaly was likely caused by that. Besides this stone lion, there were no other abnormalities in the vicinity. It must be because it was too close to him at the time, and thus the impact was strongest. Pei Yanqing, more sensitive than others, had instinctively found this spot even though she knew nothing about it. This thing couldn't stay, it might cause trouble if left for too long. Looking at the enraptured expressions around him, Fu Qian blinked and quietly lifted his foot, then stamped down without hesitation. The moss-covered bridge began to tremble faintly. Good. Having completed the test, Fu Qian stomped down with his second foot. Boom. This time everyone detected the abnormality. The crowd basking in the moonlight was finally startled awake, looking around in surprise, wondering what was happening. The bridge is collapsing. The next moment, someone shouted and ran toward the end of the bridge. This action quickly caused a chain reaction, and everyone, including the enthusiasts, grabbed their equipment and took off running. Fu Qian followed them, and to urge these people to run faster, he stealthily stomped twice more. The shaking of the bridge became more pronounced. Amid the chaos, Fu Qian pressed his hand against the railing and applied slight force. The edge of the stone lion cracked and fell into the water below the bridge. A group of people quickly retreated to the outside of the bridge, and not until the shaking slowly ceased did anyone dare to step onto it again. Fu Qian observed the surroundings, almost everyone's face showing a sense of lost perplexity. Among them, Pei Yanqing felt it the most. Fu Qian snapped his fingers, waking up a few people around him. "I'm going back to have dinner, are you coming or not?" Let's go." Young Master Qin agreed almost instantly. It was just a token gesture to begin with. Few people truly expected to discover any unidentified flying objects here. Now that the excitement had ended and the bridge was still dangerous, there was no point in staying any longer. "Fu, classmate, goodbye." Pei Yanqing finally regained her composure, greeted Fu Qian, and left with He Xian. Late at night, the returning Fu Qian stood on the bridge, now deserted. Leaning on the railing, he closed his eyes and silently sensed the anomalies around him. He quickly locked onto a target underneath the water. The next moment, a black and red tentacle grew out of his hand and slowly reached into the water. When it emerged again, at its tip was a dripping wet stone lion, emitting a pearly radiance under the moonlight. Carrying his trophy, Fu Qian hurried back home, placing the stone lion on the table for a closer look. A peculiar aura emanated from the stone lion, faint but steady. Amidst the flickering dim light, it seemed to embody some kind of eternal rhythm. "This thing is a dangerous item." Fu Qian picked it up with one hand, weighed it, and then squeezed tightly with his fingers. In a series of small, crisp sounds, crisscrossing cracks appeared on the surface of the stone lion. He placed the stone lion back down, and a surprising scene unfolded. The lion, which had been crushed, did not fall apart. Instead, it seemed to maintain its shape under some unique linkage. Not only that, but the aura attached to it did not weaken at all. Interesting. Fu Qian toyed with the cracked lion. This likely occurred because he had used power at the demigod level. With that being said, if he truly ascended to a demigod in the future, would every single move of his have this kind of impact? Has this world truly become incapable of accommodating Fu anymore? Fu Qian looked up into the sky at a 45-degree angle, deeply contemplating for 20 seconds. But speaking of which, what should he do with this thing? Forcibly crushing it was an option, but with the aura not dissipating, who's to say it wouldn't cause some sort of problem? Keep it at home. That didn't seem like a good idea either. Fu Qian thought for a moment, his gaze landing on his wrist. After the disappearance of his work ID, an imprint of the same shape had appeared on his wrist, becoming his new pass. In fact, Fu Qian believed others probably couldn't see this mark. Come to think of it, when entering the containment scenario, there were restrictions on the items he could take with him, but there didn't seem to be any when entering the storage facility. Try it. Fu Qian held the stone lion in his hand, focused his attention on the work ID, and activated it with his consciousness. The familiar storage facility reappeared before his eyes. Fu Qian immediately looked at what was in his hand. The damaged stone lion was emitting a faint bluish glow. However, it only lasted a moment before the glow dissipated into the gloomy space. The next second, the sound of crashing was heard, and the stone lion crumbled into bits and fell to the ground. There was no more special aura on it. It can be done this way. Fu Qian shook the stone dust off his hands, looking deeper into the storage facility. This place is truly amazing. Chapter 131, Chapter 131, Chapter 130 Disorder _1. Chapter 131, Chapter 130 Disorder _1. Identity verification complete, today's work commences. Miraculous as it was, after leveraging the warehouse to solve the stone lion issue, Fu Qian didn't dwell on it. The possible speculations were far too numerous, and the current amount of information too scant, making rash conclusions was utterly meaningless. Early the next day, he entered the warehouse as usual. This time, however, he made the unprecedented discovery that there was hardly any activity within the warehouse. There have been quite a few abnormal events recently. Does this mean I can slack off for the day? Or perhaps knocking off work just after punching in? Fu Qian clicked his tongue in wonder while casually checking the spot where the stone lion had shattered the day before. Now there wasn't a trace on the ground, not even the dust was visible. Warning, containment breach. Just as Fu Qian was considering the most comfortable position to slack off in, a familiar voice surfaced. Name, disorder, code, 1-019. Today's task updated, enter the containment scene of 1-019, complete recontainment. Was it just a little late? And talking about surprises, are you seriously sending a level 1 item my way just as I was about to slack off? Fu Qian looked ahead as a mist gradually took shape, the sensation of his soul being drawn out washed over him. Entering containment scene for 1-019. 4%. 6%. 10%. 18%. 34%. 66%. 100%, loading of containment scene complete. Current SAN points, 131, current inspiration, 36. Is that it? The voice at his ear abruptly halted, and Fu Qian couldn't help but furrow his brows. Something isn't right. That's too little information. There's a complete lack of background introduction, but what about a task objective? Considering the difficulty level of previous level 1 items, Fu Qian had a foreboding feeling. At this moment, the images before his eyes shifted, and his senses returned. Upon opening his eyes, Fu Qian found himself in a dimly lit room. The room was small, less than 20 square meters, and looked quite aged. At the moment, he was sitting in one corner, on a hard slab of stone. To his right was a door that appeared to be very heavy and made of metal. The other 3 sides were covered with gray dusty walls, all devoid of windows. Could this task actually be a prison break? That was Fu Qian's first thought. For no other reason than that the design of the room was just too classical, looking every bit a prison cell. He first glanced downward at himself and saw no handcuffs or shackles. However, the next moment Fu Qian made an unexpected discovery. His bare arms and hands were unnaturally pale, nearly inhuman in their ghastliness. Is this? Fu Qian was a bit puzzled. This sort of phosphorescent white was almost beyond human, wasn't it? Had he already kicked the bucket? Thinking of something, Fu Qian rubbed his fingers against the ground. The air bullet did not appear. As expected. Earlier, not only did he not receive any task objectives, but there was also no prompt for choosing a skill. The fact was that his skills were currently inactive, meaning he was no different than an ordinary person now. And it wasn't just that. Fu Qian threw a punch and found that both his strength and speed were quite ordinary. He feared he might not even match up to an average person. This level 1 item was really quite troublesome. It had been a long time since he had experienced this feeling of being back at level 1. Both the walls and the floor seemed incredibly sturdy. Under these circumstances, the likelihood of breaking out through brute force was virtually nil. Fu Qian carefully observed his surroundings and discovered that at the center of the room, there was an enormous black oil lamp. The oil lamp had an ancient design, covered with a yellowing giant glass shade that faintly displayed blotches of bloodstains. At this moment, it emitted a dim yellow glow. Its faint light seemed as though it could extinguish at any moment. However, it was already the room's only source of light. While he was sizing up the situation, noise came from the doorway, and the iron gate was slowly moved to one side. The next moment, an exaggerated figure appeared outside the iron gate. This person was extremely tall, not only clad from head to toe in a black robe, but also wearing an iron black mask on his face. One hand held a strangely shaped weapon, completely barbed at its front, while the other hand held a brass-colored pot. A prison guard. Such an eerie appearance. Without making a single sound, the prison guard entered the room almost with a floating gait. Completely ignoring Fu Qian, the guard turned his back, extended his hand, and lifted the heavy glass shade. Subsequently, he raised the brass pot in his hand and slowly poured out a strand of pale green oil. The oil lamp brightened up at a speed visible to the naked eye. In that instant, Fu Qian felt his skin turn even paler. It wasn't until the prison guard left that Fu Qian stood up from the ground and took 2 steps forward. Almost instantly, he felt the heat in his body accelerate its departure, and at the same time, his consciousness also blurred. There was something strange about the oil lamp. Fu Qian immediately realized this and swiftly retreated back into the corner. It seemed as if the object was accelerating his death. No wonder he had woken up crouched in a corner, he must have been trying to avoid it. Current task has been updated, find a way to terminate the discoloration state. Just then, a prompt sounded by his ear. Terminate the discoloration state. Fu Qian glanced over his body, and that seemed to be the situation he was in. The emphasis on current suggested that there would be new tasks later on. Unlike before when there was a direct ultimate goal, this time there seemed to be a hint of a guided task chain. No matter, he would take it one step at a time. Fu Qian wasn't too troubled, having a goal was always better than not having one. After adding oil, the lamp's effect obviously strengthened, and even in the corner, the sensation of heat dissipating still persisted. The exterior of the oil lamp was extremely sturdy, with his current condition, smashing it with his bare hands seemed nearly impossible. Fu Qian looked around and went straight to another corner of the cell, sticking close to the wall. This room could be said to be completely empty, with almost nothing in it. Apart from himself, the most noticeable thing was another corner where a skeleton sat huddled with its knees drawn up. The skeleton had clearly been dead for quite some time, even the surface of the bones had started to weather away. Fu Qian squatted down to examine it thoroughly. There was something in its hands. Soon he noticed that the skeleton's hands were crossed and tightly clenched, with something clasped between the gaunt phalanges. Not wasting any time, Fu Qian reached out to try to pry the hands apart. Ah! Just at that moment, a heart-wrenching scream emanated from within the skeleton's skull. The dark space, the sudden wailing. This classic horror movie scenario, a perennially effective scare tactic. However, the scream was abruptly cut off halfway through as Fu Qian had already grabbed hold of the skeleton's lower jaw. Too bad I'm not the same as I used to be. Fu Qian silently reflected. It's not that he was completely unscared, but since becoming a humanoid weapon, his response to threats had increasingly shifted to attack rather than to run away. Even now, not in the best condition, that reaction was almost instinctive. Could this be what they call the heart of a warrior? Chapter 132, Chapter 132, Chapter 131 Disordered, Part 2, _1. Chapter 132, Chapter 131 Disordered, Part 2, _1. Having admired himself for just half a second, Fu Qian started examining the object he got from the skeleton's hand. His time was running out. Under the scorching light of the oil lamp, he could lose his ability to act at any moment, entering a state of awaiting death. It was a blackened, round iron piece, roughly the size of a watch dial, and it appeared to have a sense of antiquity. The iron piece was very thin, making it unlikely that it contained anything within. Fu Qian toyed with the iron piece in his hand, then suddenly remembered something. Turning back, he propped up the skeleton's head again, but this time, Fu Qian directly opened its jaw and reached inside. When the skeleton had screamed earlier, it seemed like there was something inside. After fumbling around for a bit, Fu Qian pinched something out with 2 fingers. It was a hefty, spherical object. It seemed to be something the skeleton had held in its mouth before death. With the search over, Fu Qian examined his findings, one in each hand. First was the stone from the throat. About the size of a thumb, the oval surface was covered in dark red patterns, with dozens of uneven spikes interwoven throughout the twisted pattern. If it wasn't clearly a stone, he might have thought it was some kind of mutated tonsil. As for the iron piece in his right hand, one side was blank, but the other, after wiping away the dirt, had a strange pattern outlined by crude lines. Beyond these 2 items, there seemed to be nothing else useful in the room. Could they be used to counteract the discoloration state? That would require quite a bit of imagination. Fu Qian looked back at the skeleton, envisioning its state before death. From its posture, it looked as though it had been holding the spiked ball in its mouth, its eyes fixated on the iron piece. But what use was that? After a moment's thought, Fu Qian gripped the spiked ball tighter, and the skin of his palm was punctured by the spikes. In the light of the lamp, the liquid that flowed out was nearly transparent. Was this what they called discoloration? Recalling his mission objective, Fu Qian took a quick glance at his body. All over, his flesh seemed to be turning transparent bit by bit, and he could even vaguely make out the bones beneath his skin. Continuing this way, he reckoned he would soon meet the same fate as the owner of the iron piece. At the same time, the pain in his palm made his consciousness clear. This thing. Fu Qian tried scratching his arm with his fingernail. A cut appeared on his semi-transparent skin, but there was no sensation at all. Shouldn't sensation and reason both disappear in the discoloration state? Yet this stone allowed him to feel pain, thus maintaining a degree of cognition. Fu Qian exhaled, forming a rough hypothesis of the stone's function. It seemed the deceased had been using it to stay alert. What about the iron piece? Fu Qian thought for a moment, then pushed the skeleton aside. He took its place, sitting down and assuming the same posture he had envisioned. One hand holding the stone, the other holding the iron piece pattern side facing him, he focused all his attention on it. Almost instantly, Fu Qian felt the pattern in his field of vision start to move. At the same time, something seemed to awaken inside him, as silent howls filled his consciousness. The sensation of life seeping away began to slow. From that moment until now, he had felt his heartbeat for the first time. After an indeterminable amount of time, Fu Qian slowly opened his eyes. The feeling of life draining away had completely stopped. After a long exhale, Fu Qian looked at the skeleton beside him. This one seemed to know how to combat discoloration and had even prepared the way, but unfortunately, it failed in the end. Current mission has been updated. Find a way to escape the prison. A new task notification had appeared, confirming that the previous one was already complete. Find a way to escape from prison. The first thing Fu Qian thought about was the prison guard who came in to refill the lamp. Without a doubt, that was an excellent opportunity. The problem was that not only was the prison guard's stature tall and big, but he could even lift the lampshade with one hand, indicating that his strength was clearly beyond that of an ordinary person. Bringing him down with his current condition seemed very unlikely. Thus, for the following time, Fu Qian barely moved at all and focused his attention entirely on the metal strip. Soon, his skin began to regain its color bit by bit, and he could even feel an increase in strength within his body, while the faint glow emanating from his skin gradually diminished. Not knowing how much time had passed, with an itching sensation, Fu Qian's arms began to grow circles of fine scales. This scene was quite horrifying, but Fu Qian didn't stop there. After all, each increase in strength by a fraction meant a greater chance of getting free by a fraction. A little side effect was no problem. It wasn't until there were no more changes in his body that Fu Qian finally stopped. Feeling the power inside him, it almost felt like he was reborn. By previous standards, it was at least at the level of the 8th phase. Fu Qian made this judgment silently. It was difficult to tell time in the closed space, but it probably hadn't been a full day. Fu Qian was fairly satisfied with this efficiency. He was just thinking of standing up when he suddenly swayed and fell over. What's happening? He had clearly intended to stand up, but why had he moved his hand instead? Motor neuron disorder. Fu Qian remembered a skill called disorder charge. Was it a side effect of that thing? If that really was the case. Fu Qian's mind raced as he adjusted his body, slowly getting used to the new order. For example, using the command to lift his head to control his legs. However, just as he was barely getting used to it, the chaotic feeling suddenly disappeared. The abrupt contrast almost made him fall again. Coming without a trace and leaving without a shadow, this thing was a bit of a trap. It wouldn't come back every so often, would it? While thinking, Fu Qian waited in silence. Sure enough, after a while, the chaotic feeling surged through him again. This time he was prepared and tried to apply the experience he had just gained. However, it turned out that the chaotic effects were random, and the plan he had just made was already ineffective. This is such a nuisance. While feeling exasperated, Fu Qian didn't hesitate to continue experimenting. If this situation persisted, he would have to get used to it. Finally, after undergoing the chaotic impacts more than 10 times, Fu Qian gradually adapted to these periodic disturbances and reduced the time it took to regain control of his actions to within 1 minute. As long as it didn't happen during combat, there shouldn't be any problem. Fu Qian looked at the oil lamp in the middle of the cell. There wasn't much oil left. The prison guard should be coming in soon, and his current condition was good enough to give it a try. Fu Qian began silently adjusting his body, preparing for the action to come. Clang! The sound of the door opening came, and by then Fu Qian had returned to sitting in the corner of the cell. To avoid exposing his state, he buried his face down and covered as much of his exposed skin as possible. The fully wrapped prison guard appeared again, floating straight in without any hint of observing the prisoner's condition, and directly lifting the lampshade to refill the oil. Fu Qian slowly moved to the guard's blind spot. Just as he was about to make his move, his nerves misfired, almost causing him to fall over once more. Chapter 133, Chapter 133, Chapter 132 Disarray, Part 3_1. Chapter 133, Chapter 132 Disarray, Part 3_1. Could it be true that what one worries about always comes to pass? Feeling the chaos within, Fu Qian muttered to himself. Even after practicing for so long just now, it would take at least a minute to straighten out all the chaos. But with the lamp nearly filled, the prison guard might turn around and leave at any moment. If he missed this opportunity, it would probably be another day's wait. Though he would have more time for adaptation exercises, the risk of being discovered also increased. However, if he didn't want to miss the chance, he needed to untangle the jumbled nerves within 10 seconds. Unfortunately, that was impossible. Fu Qian was very aware that he was not sufficiently familiar with his own body. By then, the prison guard had already added oil, and was slowly lowering the lampshade, turning to prepare to walk out. He couldn't wait any longer. Fu Qian struggled to stand, raising his head and throwing a punch. It seemed like a forced attack, but because of the chaos in controlling his body, he couldn't exert his strength normally. Not only did this punch lack any power, his body even lost balance slightly due to the exaggerated movement. But gritting his teeth and persevering, Fu Qian still managed to land his fist on the prison guard's back by taking advantage of the element of surprise. Wait, this thing isn't human. The next moment, Fu Qian was startled. The feedback from his fist felt like he had smashed it into granite. Extremely hard with none of the suppleness of skin. If not for the lack of force, he might have broken his wrist. This light and airy punch undoubtedly didn't cause any substantial harm. The prison guard turned around almost instantly. In the flickering cold light, he didn't hesitate to raise the weapon in his hand and thrust it straight toward the chest. The speed wasn't very fast, but still not something his current body could dodge. As the momentum reached him, Fu Qian barely twisted his body to avoid vital areas, taking the strike with his left shoulder. Crack! The force carried by the weapon was surprisingly strong. With a crisp sound, Fu Qian's arm went limp and flopped down. Heavily injured in an instant, Fu Qian chose not to retreat but to press on, engaging in close combat. This suicidal behavior left him riddled with wounds in no time. Blood sprayed around, the sound of breaking bones was incessant, and within less than 10 seconds, almost every part of his body except one arm ceased moving. Good, that would do. At that moment, Fu Qian took a deep breath. As it is well known, chaos usually stems from having too many variables. The confusion spreading through all the nerves was indeed difficult to adjust, but with only a few variables left, adaptation became much easier. The next moment, Fu Qian lifted up his only movable arm and threw a punch with full force. Unlike before, this punch successfully unleashed real power. The paralysis of most body parts made it easier to focus the energy into one point. Boom! With the sudden acceleration, Fu Qian's serious punch smeared across the opponent's chin. In that instant, Fu Qian felt his arm had also become useless. The opponent's chin was as hard as the back, feeling like hitting stone. And with all the force of desperation behind the punch, the two collided, and Fu Qian instantly felt several fingers break. However, this injury seemed to be worth it. With a resounding boom, the sound of crystal stone shattering echoed through the air. The prison guard's masked head actually flew straight off from the neck. The beheaded torso stood motionlessly for a moment before toppling over rigidly backwards. This thing indeed had hardness to spare, but lacked flexibility. As long as one wasn't afraid of getting hurt, and had sufficient output force, killing it turned out to not be very difficult. Fu Qian sat on the ground, gasping for air, looking at the head not far away. The mask had already been thrown aside, revealing the true face underneath. It indeed had human facial features, but, unfortunately, was rigid like a sculpture. Moreover, the skin seemed to be covered with a fine layer of crystal, shining like diamonds under the light. Fu Qian looked at the severed neck and could see red flesh and white bone, but despite the major arteries being severed, not a single drop of blood flowed out. This place really reeked of evil from every corner. After a brief observation, Fu Qian turned his attention back to himself. The fierce struggle had left his body riddled with wounds. The most severe injury turned out to be the result of his final burst, the extreme load on his body, plus the backlash from punching a rock, which was quite painful to bear. It's easy to go from frugality to luxury. His current combat style was, to a certain extent, a choice made after getting used to a physique with super high recovery power. Waiting silently for the effects of his neural disarray to end, Fuqian stood up and laboriously moved towards the door. This place was way too big. Poking his head out, Fuqian saw that the outside was still dimly lit, suggesting that it was located somewhere underground. And at a cursory glance, the area was staggeringly vast, at least the size of 5 football fields. Not just that, there were multiple levels both up and down, filled with similar cells. Giant stone pillars supported the structure, with rows of prison corridors connected to each other. No wonder no one had come for so long, such a large place would require an immense number of prison guards. The cell door featured the most basic kind of latch structure, but because there wasn't even a small opening for delivering meals, the difficulty of escaping became tremendous, with no conceivable way to open it from the inside. This place seemed to have never considered feeding the prisoners at all. After roughly assessing his current situation, Fuqian slowly restored the gate to its place, leaving a small crack as he withdrew. Calculating the angle carefully, he braced his arm against the wall to pop his dislocated joint back into place, then began to slowly bandage his other wounds. Fortunately, his body was covered with circular scales in many places, which offered some protection, otherwise his injuries would have been even more severe. Another comforting fact was that, although incomparable to his original body, this body's healing power could also be considered astonishing. Sitting on the ground, Fuqian could clearly feel his wounds healing rapidly, and his strength swiftly returning. At this rate, he would be able to move freely in at most an hour. After silently making this judgment, Fuqian turned his head and continued to study the body on the ground. Whether due to the mutation or not, the headless corpse was still excessively heavy. With considerable effort, Fuqian finally stripped the robe off the body and put it on himself. The skin underneath the robe was indeed in that diamond-like crystalline state, feeling like stone to the touch. Apart from the robe, Fuqian managed to find 2 items on the body. A black octagonal iron badge, plus an enormous rusty key. The key was rusty, clearly having not been used for a long time. Fuqian packed away the 2 items, along with the iron shards and stone he had found earlier. Testing his strength, which had recovered quite a bit, Fuqian dragged the body back to the corner where he had first awoken. After positioning it against the wall, he also picked up the head that had fallen to one side and placed it on the neck. Having done all this, he put on the prison guard's mask, lifted his weapon and the oil lamp, and slowly pulled open the door to the cell. Chapter 134, Chapter 134, Chapter 133 Disorder, Part 4, _1. Chapter 134, Chapter 133 Disorder, Part 4, _1. This underground prison was undoubtedly a very grand construction. Disguised as a prison guard, Fuqian moved silently through the corridor. The robe was obviously a bit too large, and the material was stiff and uncomfortable to wear. However, considering the condition of its former owner, he could understand why. With skin in such a state, it's unlikely they would feel chafed. As he walked, he gathered information about his surroundings, and quickly constructed the layout of the prison in his mind. His current task was to get out of there. After identifying several possible exits, Fuqian started moving towards them, adjusting his route and occasionally taking detours as necessary. There were quite a few prison guards carrying teapots, all of them constantly on patrol. And with the corridors being relatively narrow, Fuqian wasn't confident he could get close without being recognized. Luckily, the space was large enough to provide ample room to maneuver and avoid a direct encounter. This labyrinthine wandering went on for about an hour, during which Fuqian also saw some new prisoners being escorted by the guards. As expected, each new prisoner reflected an unusual white light from their body. They were the so-called discolored ones. This place wasn't a prison, but a burial pit. Linking this to the scenes he had witnessed in the cells, Fuqian silently made his judgment. Although he didn't know what danger the discolored ones posed, someone was undeniably gathering them here, guarded en masse by these strange guards. And the guards' duty was not only to monitor them but also to act as expediters of demise. For instance, they kept adding lamp oil, ensuring the cell lamps never went out. Fuqian had tested it before. The light was quite lethal to the discolored ones. One by one, the discolored ones swiftly vanished within the prison. An hour later, this risky game of Pac-Man finally came to an end when Fu Qian located a place that might be an exit, based on the route along which the discolored ones were taken. This must be it. In front of him was a spiral staircase leading upwards, too high to see the top. Fu Qian didn't immediately start climbing but stood still and waited. Soon, a sense of neural chaos washed over him. Fu Qian quickly adjusted, making sure not to show any signs of abnormality. About a minute later, having adapted to the new disarray, he stepped forward and started ascending. The staircase was obviously very old, and Fu Qian moved onwards, accompanied by creaking sounds. When the feeling of neural chaos subsided, he finally reached the top of the staircase. However, to his surprise, despite the door being ajar, he could already hear a noisy crowd outside. He peeked through the crack of the door and found that instead of the desolate place he had imagined, the area was bustling with people coming and going. After a moment's thought, Fu Qian took several items out, then quickly shed the oversized robe and hid it out of sight. Once done, he straightened himself out and pushed open the door in front of him. Almost instantly, the surrounding chatter stopped, and countless eyes focused on his face. However, Fu Qian didn't pay attention to this. He promptly looked up at the sky. At that moment, several beams of light of various colors and shapes hung against the azure sky, their brilliance shining. Aurora. It did resemble one, but it was clearly daytime. Fu Qian stared at this spectacle he had never seen before, genuinely astounded. He had counted a total of 7 light beams just now, and more importantly, one of them had an outline that matched the pattern on the metal piece exactly. There was still such a thing. In this strange world, Fu Qian didn't believe there was no connection between the two. What on earth is this? The source of power? Constellation belief? The light of the transcendent? However, before he had the chance to take a closer look, he heard someone scream. "You, how did you get out?" A young man pointed at himself, stammering as he spoke. "Why are you yelling so loudly? Do I know you?" Fu Qian muttered to himself, but judging from the person's reaction in front of him, he undoubtedly should recognize him. The young man's eyes were darting about, sizing up Fu Qian with a mixture of shock and suspicion. The next moment, his gaze landed on the scales on Fu Qian's arm, and his expression became even more horrified and inexplicable. "You, what is this?" Fu Qian still ignored him and started surveying the surrounding environment instead. He was beside a building resembling a clock tower, with the door he just exited located on the side wall of the building. And the onlookers surrounding him, regardless of gender, age, or attire, were all quite distinctive. This place is a bit odd. Why does it feel so different from the other task scenes? Linking this to the anomalies at the start of the task, Fu Qian's foreboding grew stronger. At that moment, a gap opened up in the crowd of onlookers, and a team hurried over. This team of 5 people wore matching black coats and weapons at their waists, all exuding a powerful presence. Compared to the onlookers, this small team certainly seemed exceptionally formidable. The leader of the team was a woman in her 40s or 50s, looking quite intellectual. This lady came forward, examining Fu Qian intently for a while before finally speaking. "Hello, could you explain the current situation, please? 2 days ago, we received a report and, considering the signs of discoloration on you, we put you in the underground prison, but now..." The lady looked at Fu Qian. "Not only have you walked out, but it seems you have awakened." Yes, it was rather quiet down there, a perfect place for contemplating and understanding the way. I discarded distracting thoughts, cleared my mind, and then I quickly awakened. Fu Qian spoke nonsense off the top of his head. A good place for contemplating and understanding the way below. The woman also furrowed her brows, clearly not quite believing Fu Qian's words. The next moment, she waved her hand, and several people rushed forward promptly, surrounding Fu Qian. These people clearly treated the discolored ones with the attitude reserved for fearsome beasts. Fu Qian looked around at the people and roughly understood why the discolored ones received such treatment. In this place, it seemed this was analogous to a contagious disease, and he had even been reported and captured. From their reactions, Fu Qian could almost conclude that few of the discolored ones sent below ever returned. Now that he thought about it, his senior cellmate must have realized what fate awaited him and prepared in advance. Hoping to awaken by relying on the 2 items he brought in and thus escape the grim fate. Unfortunately, even though he swallowed the thorn stone to stay alert, he still hadn't succeeded before the expediters of demise took him away. Amidst the standoff, another figure hurried over from a distance, clearly shocked before even arriving upon seeing Fu Qian. It really is the Dragon Feast. Chapter 135, Chapter 135, Chapter 134 Disorder, Part 5, _1. Chapter 135, Chapter 134 Disorder, Part 5, _1. Who are you, elder brother? Fu Qian looked at the excited men in front of him. A white collar, a shirt and trousers with a coffee-colored robe. If he were holding a book, he'd be the spitting image of a priest. From the reactions of the people around him, it was clear that this priest was quite prestigious here. With his recent exclamation, Fu Qian felt the gazes on him turn fervently intense. Is it truly Dragon Feast? The sequence that disappeared for decades. The lady in the trench coat looked at the priest, her expression gravely serious. Trust me, Baroness, there's no mistake, the blue circular fine scales, starting from the limbs and torso. The priest's voice was trembling. After so many years, finally, a sequence has returned. Hiss. The woman known as the Baroness took a deep breath. I think it's best if we verify it first, so we don't end up empty-handed and happy for nothing. The priest nodded vigorously, his face brimming with enthusiasm as he beckoned Fu Qian with an indisputable tone. Please follow me. Dragon Feast. Sequence. Returned. Under the escort of the Baroness and her entourage, Fu Qian followed the priest onward while trying to piece together the proverb that the 3-year period has come to an end. Although he had caught only fragments of the conversation, he could somehow piece together some of the content. Sequence probably referred to different types of power, and the one he awakened to was one of them, called Dragon Feast. And from what the priest implied, the Dragon Feast sequence had not appeared for decades, making it a rare phenomenon. His awakening had marked the return of this lost sequence, and they were exceedingly excited about it. The priest seemed to have a way to verify its authenticity and was now leading him there. For the moment, there seemed to be no danger, Fu Qian silently concluded. Of course, there was another point, he was technically an escapee. Although nobody had cared about this since just now, it was hard to say what their reaction would be once discovered. Fu Qian decided to wait and see what unfolded. Amidst the watchful eyes of the crowd along the way, the group followed the priest to a building that resembled a church. Passing through a long colonnade to the interior, Fu Qian identified the shapes of several colorful clusters in the stained glass windows around the hall. It related indeed to their faith. The rest of you wait here, the Baroness and I will go up. The priest brought them to a stairway on the side of the hall and gestured for the rest of the squad to wait there. The others promptly halted, while the Baroness, without a word, signaled with her eyes for Fu Qian to walk in front. A few minutes later, the three of them reached the top of another tower and stopped in front of a large brown door. The priest first bowed in worship before pushing the doors open to either side. Behind the door was a spacious hall, with 7 stone statues of various forms standing at intervals, forming a circle. Besides that, there was nothing else. This is the Hall of Glory. The priest gazed at each statue, his eyes filled with an inexplicable devotion and ecstasy. Come with me. At his bidding, Fu Qian approached one of the statues. The statue's form was quite different from the aurora in the sky, it was mostly human in shape. However, one could see some peculiar mutations in parts of it. The statue before Fu Qian was distinctly covered in fine scales, extremely similar to those on his own arm. Of course, compared to the statue, his own condition was still mild, with only the scales being abnormal and the rest of him looking normal. The statue appeared far more ferocious, not only with a face like a lizard, but even something like wings sprouting from its back. Following the priest's cue, Fu Qian placed his hand on the statue. Under their anxious gazes, the statue slowly radiated patterns of golden light, resplendent and lustrous. Almost instantly, Fu Qian heard 2 heavy breaths. It is the true Dragon Feast. Though the level is not high, it's real. The priest looked at the Baroness, his face full of ecstasy. The latter finally showed emotion. 7 Lights blessing, this is the hope of everyone. Yes, I will go announce this news immediately. Announcing the good news, I have no objection, but do you really not care about how I came out? Fu Qian looked at the 2 excited people. Sorry, could you explain a bit? Explain. The priest glanced at him puzzled, then suddenly realized. Did the previous discoloration state affect your memory? How much do you remember? Almost nothing. The priest had already found the reason. Fuqian simply went along with it, answering very truthfully. You must at least know about Dragon Feast, right? The priest pointed at his body. Fuqian shook his head. Ah. The priest sized up Fuqian, sighing deeply. Understandable, awakening while under the discoloration curse must have come at a great cost. But no matter, you have become one of the sequence, you don't have to worry anymore. That is indeed good news. Let's walk and talk, I'll give you a brief introduction to the situation. The priest led Fuqian outside. In this hall of glory, there are statues of the 7 kings of sequence. They represent the ultimate form of the 7 sequences power. The 7 sequences correspond to the eternal and undying 7 lights, which are also the foundation of this world's existence. Unfortunately, the legacy has been declining for many years, and some sequences have not seen any awakeners anymore, including Dragon Feast. Until now, we only have awakeners from 3 sequences left. The Baroness interjected from the side. So that's how it is. That's why your awakening has uplifted everyone so much. The return of the ancient sequence represents the greatest hope. The people outside have lived in fear for too long. I see. But what exactly is the discoloration? You don't remember that either. This time, even the priest was shocked. I only remember a period of extreme pain, the sensory memories throughout my body slowly fading away, but I don't recall anything else. Yes, that is the discoloration curse. The Baroness spoke in a low voice. Everyone who has not yet entered a sequence is under the threat of the discoloration curse. Once afflicted, life gradually dims until it completely dissipates. In fact, there have not been any awakeners for nearly a year. Meanwhile, the number of the discolored ones is steadily increasing. We are investigating the cause while we have no choice but to lock the discolored ones in prison. You are the only one known so far who has survived with the curse still in you. In short, your outstanding performance has given everyone hope. The priest was on the brink of tears, barely able to contain his emotions. Endowed with unparalleled talent, saving the world from despair. What a sensation of being the chosen one. Fuqian sighed, understanding the general situation. Never thought I'd have the day to become Long Outyen. Current task completed, target updated. Investigate the reason for the increase of the discolored ones. Fuqian was still reflecting when the voice rang in his ear, the long-awaited task finally updated. Chapter 136, Chapter 136, Chapter 135, Disorder, 6_1. Chapter 136, Chapter 135, Disorder, 6_1. Indeed, as a young man with unconventional thinking, Fuqian seldom indulged in fantasies of being the chosen one. In his view, the idea of seeing oneself as the center of the world was boring and stupid. Everyone could at most be the center of their own universe, and even then, many failed to achieve that. The advantage of this mindset was that Fuqian rarely expected something for nothing. If he encountered a pie falling from the sky, his first reaction would be to suspect a conspiracy. Take, for example, if a beautiful woman suddenly kissed him on the street, Fuqian's first thought would definitely not be that his charm was irresistible, but rather that she must have eaten something disgusting. Therefore, confronted with a situation that seemed to label him a chosen one, he became even more cautious. Of course, the priest Baroness seemed extremely excited, practically dragging him out in a hurry. A crowd had already gathered outside. After the priest announced the verification results with great enthusiasm, the scene instantly erupted. As an auspicious sign, Fuqian saw undisguised envy in the eyes of the onlookers. If what the priest said was true, indeed in this place, only by becoming a member of a sequence could one gain a true sense of security. After all, no one wanted to wake up to face those expediters of demise. And here he was back at the same question. Fuqian glanced at the priest and Baroness beside him. Did these people really not care how he got out? Though he was now seen as a beacon of hope and probably wouldn't face much trouble if discovered, their lack of questioning was still abnormal. At that moment, the sound of the clock tower chiming the hour reached them. Fuqian noticed the Baroness momentarily froze before a strange look came over her as she looked at him, as if she had realized something. Finally noticing something was wrong. Fuqian thought silently but then saw the Baroness bend down and whisper something in the priest's ear. The latter also appeared momentarily stunned before giving a few words of encouragement to the crowd and then dispersing the enthusiastic onlookers. They took Fu Qian along to a small room, where the priest hesitated as he looked at him. "Is there anything wrong with you?" "What could possibly be wrong with me?" Fu Qian had thought the two were going to confront him about the jailbreak, but instead, they seemed concerned about his well-being. "The cost," the Baroness said, shaking her head and looking at Fu Qian with disbelief. "Every blessed by light shall cast a shadow, every sequence has its intrinsic cost." "And the cost of the dragon feasting sequence," the priest said, frowning, "is intermittent control over chaos, which normally occurs once every hour. It's been enough time for an hour since then, but you've shown no signs of disturbance, which in itself is an anomaly." The priest and the Baroness went back and forth, finally clarifying the situation. So that was the confusion. Fu Qian thought to himself. Of course, he was not without anomalies, in fact, he had just experienced one a while ago. But thanks to his practice during this period, he could now control his limbs to perform normal actions even when in a state of chaos. Although he could not exert much strength, he managed not to fall to the ground. However, Fu Qian did not rush to answer, instead looking at the two people in front of him and asking in return. "I haven't seen your costs, have I?" "Ours." The two exchanged glances, and the priest shook his head with a sigh. "You really don't remember anything." "The costs of different sequences manifest in various ways. Dragon Feast is the most offensive among all the sequences, and its anomalies are the most conspicuous. My allegiance is to the Spire sequence, whose anomaly is a constant presence. The specific manifestation is an overwhelming desire to kill, which must be constantly restrained. In fact, that's why I'm here." "And her?" Fu Qian then looked at the Baroness. "The Baroness belongs to the celestial sequence, her cost is somewhat similar to yours." The priest mused. "Similar? Excuse me for a moment," said the Baroness out of the blue, interrupting Fu Qian's confusion as to what it was, and without waiting for a reply, she promptly turned and left the room. "What is it?" Fu Qian looked at the priest. "Periodic strong desires." Taking advantage of the other party's absence, the priest quickly said. "No wonder." Fu Qian remembered the Baroness's face was a bit odd before she left. The Baroness had delicate features, but her entire demeanor could be described as having an innate halo, the kind that absolutely wouldn't make someone think of lustful desires. Unexpectedly, that was the price to pay. At that moment, the priest exhaled. Within the sequence, the more one ascends in ability, the more severe the abnormalities become. In fact, many from the celestial sequence need to resort to self-harm to alleviate them. Understood. Fu Qian nodded. "I remember you mentioned earlier there are 3 sequences, what about the other one?" "You've already met them before." "Those prison guards?" Fu Qian suddenly understood the priest's meaning. "Correct, they are from the luminous stone sequence. The benefit of the luminous stone sequence is their extreme defensive capabilities and significant lifespan extension. The cost is sluggish reactions and a sensitivity to light. No wonder those people were wrapped up so tightly. That's why they almost all live underground. I see now, my anomaly hasn't actually disappeared." Having clarified the situation, Fu Qian spoke outright. Considering his own mission, he would inevitably have to deal with these people later on, so it was better to dispel any unnecessary suspicions. "I still intermittently lose control, it's just that through practice, I've been able to handle it a bit better, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to come out of the prison." Having gotten out of prison, the priest seemed to realize something. "How did you get out just now?" "Fought my way out," Fu Qian said nonchalantly. Being the beacon of hope now, he was quite confident that the priest wouldn't harm him, so there was no need to conceal anything. Actually, it wasn't necessary to resort to violence. If you had communicated with them and they confirmed that the discoloration curse was gone, they should have let you out. After a long gaze at Fu Qian, the priest finally spoke. "I don't think so. My strength at that time was basically like tapping on the shoulder, yet that guy immediately took up arms, showing no signs of friendliness. I did communicate, but they seemed to prefer physical language. All right, you don't need to worry about this, I'll handle it when the time comes." The priest shook his head. "What's going on?" After a while, the Baroness, now showing no trace on her face, returned and noticed something amiss in the expressions of the two. The priest was not planning to hide anything from her and recounted both the cost and the prison escape. So that's how it was. The Baroness was visibly shocked after hearing. Don't worry about the prison. Did you really manage to resist the anomaly purely through willpower? Barely. That's already very impressive. The Baroness expressed rare praise. Going forward, we need you to make appearances as much as possible, which will have a very positive effect on morale. No problem, in fact, I have a better idea, such as joining your team. Fu Qian looked at the Baroness. Rather than being just a mascot, I'd prefer to investigate the discoloration curse. His latest mission was to investigate the truth behind the increase of the discolored ones, which aligned perfectly with the Baroness's work, making joining her an ideal move. Join the team. The Baroness was clearly surprised by Fu Qian's proposal, but after a few seconds of hesitation, she agreed. That would indeed be better. In fact, we have a target in mind right now. Part 8 of the series ends here. Thank you for watching and listening. If you find it interesting, please give us a like, a comment and a subscription so that we have the motivation to make the next videos.